what is it that they say? It's time, that old political slogan, it's time. Well, it's time indeed. It's time to get back to a slow chat. It has been a long time between drinks, or in my case, between smokes. Let's be honest, this is what you all came for. It's not for my pretty face, not even for my amazing guest, which, by the way, I'm very excited about this week, or this episode, but I'm not doing them weekly. Sorry, I'm making promises I can't keep. I used to do these weekly. For those that are new, welcome to Slow Chats. Welcome to the madcap world of a slow chat. You're going to have a lot of fun tonight. I used to do these weekly, but that was when we were all locked in our homes and no one had anything better to do. Can you believe? I used to do slow chats that used to go up to 5 hours long. I'm not making this up. We'd start at 8 p.m. We'd finish it after 1 o'clock in the morning, and there would still be over 1,000 people watching. By the end, at 1 o'clock in the morning, that's how bored we were during lockdowns. Now, I'm not expecting that that's going to happen today. People have things to do. We've all got back to life to at least to one degree or another. However, let's be honest, this is really why you're here. So tonight, I have a Hoya de Monterrey Excalibur. It is a handmade Nicaraguan cigar. Absolutely beautiful cigar. I've had these before, and this is the short crystal is what they call it. It comes in this little sort of glass, I'm not sure, probably acrylic if I'm honest. Case doesn't sound like crystal, that's for sure, but they call it the crystal, and it is a beautiful cigar. So I'll get that out in just a moment. However, your comments are already pouring in. Long overdue, says Mona. Thank you. Yes, I agree. Nathan, howdy. Daniel, howdy. Daniel's just got to outdo everybody. Like one howdy is not enough. You've got to do more. Nathan, thumbs up to you as well. Hi from Queensland, says John. Sam says yay. GT says hi, Topher. Melissa says, I missed your slow chats. Good to be back. Daniel says you've got a glass condom. Yeah, well, if yours can fit inside there, then you've got some other problems. Stuart is also smoking a cigar. Good on you, Stu. Having a cream Connecticut Churchill. Rita says hello. Jenny says, good evening from Melbourne. And Tim says, no, I'm still bored in life. I'm a boring person. So you haven't, there you go. This is why he's here. Tim is here tonight because he's still a boring person, even though the world has opened up. If I missed it, Stairmaster Andrews, g'day to you as well. Right, let's keep those comments coming in. This is one of the beautiful things about a slow chat is it is live. Now, let me tell you about my guest. This is very exciting for me. I met this man thanks to the Aussie Wire. The Aussie Wire is an amazing thing in my life. I thoroughly enjoy doing it. We've done over 100 interviews. We've done 38 episodes now. And one of the absolutely brilliant things is that I get to meet and interview and talk to really fascinating people. And my guest tonight, Dr. Brian Walker, MLC. He's a member of Parliament in West Australia for the Legalise Cannabis Party. We had, I'll call it spark. We were bouncing off each other right away, and I went, right, I want you on a slow chat. This is going to be fun. So tonight is the outworking of that. Tonight, I will finally get the interview that I've been waiting for a couple of months now, actually, since I interviewed him for the Aussie Wire. We're going to have a lot of fun. All right, are you comfortable? Are you settled? Have you got yourself something to smoke? Have you got yourself something to drink? I hope you do, and I hope you've got the most comfortable spot in the house, because I got to warn you, we could be here for a while. I'm just saying, I haven't done this for a while, so I might be like, this might just drag on and on. Who knows? I make no promises one way or the other, but I'm just saying we might be here for a while. All right, we're good. I've talked about the cigar. Just drinking red wine and black tea tonight, for those of you that are interested in my whiskeys and all that sort of stuff. There's no whiskey tonight. Let's get all the formalities out of the way. I think we're good. To go. All right. Dr. Brian Walker, welcome to the Slow Chat. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's good to be here. Good to speak to you again.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. We do have a slight West Australian lag here. There's just that slight, just the distance is kicking in a little bit. I'll try and speak up a little bit louder so that you can hear me all the way over there. Now, look, we hit it off straight away when I did interview. Now, I interviewed you about a push towards cannabis legalization that was happening across multiple states in Australia. That's probably as good a place as any to start and just get a bit of an update on how that's going. I know these things do move slowly, but honestly, I've kind of heard nothing since we spoke. Can you give us a bit of an update? Where are things going with your push? And you've been joined by some other MPs as well towards decriminalising cannabis in various parts of Australia.
Well, you're quite right. It's incredibly slow. And it's probably slow because the political mindset is dead set against cannabis. Sure. I don't know why. But exciting things have happened. For example, our select committee has reported, and the government has eventually they've got around to actually responding to that. And of the 16 recommendations that we made, they've actually agreed to 11 of them. Okay. 2 they've rejected, and the rest have said, well, we'll take note of this. The important one was the THC driving laws. Now, bearing in mind, Tasmania, they have permitted a medical defense against driving with THC in your system.
Okay.
So Tasmania is leading Australia. Can you imagine that? Tasmania is leading Australia.
That's a worry. That's a sign of trouble. Can I just stop you right there? Because there would be a lot of people for whom that rings alarm bells. If you've got THC in your system, you must be impaired. But those two things are not actually the same, are they?
They're very different, in fact. The presence of THC absolutely does not equate to impairment. You can, of course, be impaired with THC and just smoke a joint and try driving, see what happens. You'll be
don't do that.
But compare this. If you're driving with alcohol in your system, you're driving at 140.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. It's a different kind of impairment. Someone made the point to me a while ago that no one goes to a ball game high on marijuana and starts a fight. Right, that's what the frat boys drinking beer are the ones starting the fight. The guys that are getting up on a joint aren't the ones starting the fights. Okay, so of the recommendations that were accepted, what does that mean? Are they going to become law sometime soon? Like, what's the process ahead here?
Well, you can measure political speed in terms of micrometers per hour.
Yeah, so, that's fair.
There's a law they've actually got in place just now, the proceeds of crime, the confiscation of those proceeds.
Right.
Now, 1,800 odd days ago, the government agreed that the law is not fit for purpose. The whole point was, scrap this law, it's not fit for purpose, do another one.
Right.
In those 1,800 days, not one single change has been made.
Yeah, right.
So, and what people are suffering, people are losing property because of laws which are not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the THC driving laws, how long will it be? Well, everybody knows that driving with THC is not the big bugbear that people fear it is. But what the government can do is, if they allow this law to happen, they will win votes. So they're going to plan to make this law at the time most inconvenient for me.
Right.
And good on them. Let's do it.
I
hope you're enjoying that.
Oh, look, this is in the Hoyo de Monterey Excalibur. It's a beautiful, beautiful cigar. This is one of the things that let's just start here. I didn't have a plan for where we were going to start, but let's start here. The cynicism that is evident as soon as you get involved in politics, either as a commentator such as myself or as an MP such as yourself, it almost beggars belief. I was raised in a family where you did what was right. Now, we didn't always get it right, but we always did what we believed was right. And you always, I was raised on a principle of deference, deferring to one another. If someone else expresses a preference and I don't really have a strong preference one way or the other, I'll just defer to your preference and we can all just get along. Then you get into politics and you discover that to survive in politics, you really have to have a very vicious kind of, I will take everything I can get kind of an attitude. And people really play hardball. Do you get people coming to you saying, hey, we elected you, why isn't cannabis legalized yet? Like these sort of idealistic notions of oh, you're an MP, you should be able to fix this.
Well, first of all, politics is a blood sport. It's actually good fun as a blood sport, if you look at it like that. Secondly, in politics, truth doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Not in the least. What matters is the perception of truth, how you control the narrative.
Sure.
And that is really not good. And thirdly, what we've got here is that you may in opposition say one thing, and in government you say the opposite.
How often
You'll justify that. Yes, it's stupid. And I personally, when I came into politics, I didn't like politicians. So I thought, well, you're all liars. It turns out they're actually all good people, well, mostly good people at heart. But they're bound not to serve the people, they're bound to serve the party first. And that is where our problems start, I think.
So I'm in the process. I've just actually finished the first draft 2 days ago. I completed the first draft and I'm now in the process of having started the revision of my first book, Good People Break Bad Laws. It's a discussion on civil disobedience, really. But I dedicate a number of chapters to this issue of how did we get here and understanding the nature of people who are attracted to politics. And it's... Part of my revision of those chapters is trying to make sure that they're not too despairing, because when you understand the nature of politics and the nature of the person who is attracted to politics, present company excluded, of course, it really does become a bit of a Gordian knot where you can't unpick one part of it without other parts. Like it just becomes this very difficult puzzle to solve. Do you have any insight as someone who has been inside the walls and you've seen, like you say, these are usually decent people. People don't believe me when I say that. I'm like, no. Politicians aren't actually motivated by evil, even when they're doing evil. Understand, Daniel Andrews, as much as I despise him, and personally, speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for you at all here, I consider him to be a psychopath. That's my genuine read on him. However, he was motivated by a desire to do good in his mind. Everything that he did, he believed was in the best interests of the people. It just so happened it was also in his best interest politically, but that's pure coincidence. He was actually motivated by wanting to do good, and people really wrestle with this.
Well, psychopaths don't always carry axes to kill people. It's an attitude. So the psychopaths make very good leaders. They're detested by the people who they're under them, but they're loved by the ones above them. This is one of the features. I mean, there's plenty of examples. I must say, I don't actually interact with the Victorian politics. It turns me off, actually, apart from, of course, in Legalise Cannabis in Victoria.
Sure.
But I saw what happened in COVID, for example, with Dan Andrews, and I thought, how could you? I mean, I thought you were in prison. I didn't see any signs. I didn't see any sense, no logic. I'm speaking as a doctor, not just as a politician here. Yeah. But how the hell can you do that? So, but anyhow, that's another thing altogether. But the issue with politics is that it's not actually about serving the people, although it should be. It's really about serving yourself or serving the party. The Gordian knot you mentioned, if you're in the party system, there's no way you've got to fixing it. If you want to progress, become a parliamentary secretary, become a minister, become someone who gets a good job at the end of it, you can't piss off the leaders.
100%. 100%. And you become a party man in the same way as someone becomes a company man. We all kind of know what that means, right? They've sacrificed everything that made them an individual. They've sacrificed their own morality. They've completely outsourced their own sense of morality to the company. They'll do whatever the company tells them is right in order to progress within the company.
Well, that's the same thing as look at its most extreme. You saw this in Nazi Germany. I'm only following orders. Like I'm just a simple bureaucrat here. You order me, I do this.
Yeah.
It's the same system. I experienced this in Russia. I experienced this in actually many parts of the world.
Yeah.
People following orders because it's more than my job's worth. The job's worth these.
Or what we saw, and I highlight this again in the book, and it's in the documentary Battleground Melbourne, is a police officer saying, well, I have to put food on the table. This is the only job I'm qualified to do. I don't know how to do anything else. And so what happens is their genuine obligations to their family get weaponized against their conscience. And they end up doing bad things for good reasons, and breaking their conscience in order to uphold what they believe are their obligations. And I think that happens a lot with politicians as well within the party. If I can just stay in for longer, I'll be able to do amazing things once I'm the premier or once I'm the minister or once I'm this. And so they compromise and compromise and compromise all the way to get there. And by the time they get there, they've forgotten who they were.
But what we also have is the bureaucrats in the background, the highly paid, unelected bureaucrats. Now, if you've ever watched Yes Minister or The Chaser, it's exactly right.
Utopia? Such a great
look. It's gorgeous. But what they're doing is they want to maintain the status quo because we've been there, we know this, we trust it, and this is the right thing to do. And Minister, was it really a wise decision? That's very brave of you. And so what happens is you get into that position as a minister, you want to make a change, and the bureaucrats say, "Oh, I don't think so, the minister. No, your predecessor tried that as well; it failed." All these stories come out, and you've done your best, and you're stamped on. But you can't let that be shown. I'm the minister, I'm in charge.
That's
right.
You're
not.
No.
You're not.
No. And these bureaucrats, especially once they're senior bureaucrats, and they've spent 20 years in the public service, they know how to run rings around a new minister. And also, I'll add this as well. I saw this with the water issue. So I've been banging on about mismanagement of water in the Murray-Darling Basin since 2012. Can you believe 11 years now I've been banging on about this issue? And in 2019, we were getting some momentum. We had a protest at Parliament House in Canberra, fully sanctioned in partnership with the federal police there. 4,000 farmers showed up, a whole bunch of machinery and trucks. We had various politicians there with us. It was a great day. A great weekend, actually. We ended up, I'll tell you a story because it's a slow chat. Can I tell you a story?
You can indeed.
All right. So we're there, and there are rules about where you can protest and where you can't, and keeping a respectful distance away from the front doors of Parliament House and these sorts of things. And so we're being very compliant and very good and doing all the things we're told to do. And then at one point we had, it was pre-scheduled, everyone moved up to this row of bollards out the front of Parliament House in Canberra. Sort of, there's some lawn, there's a bit of, it's paved area, then there's some lawn, and then there's these bollards. And that was the line that we were allowed to go to. And the federal police were standing there very politely, not at all aggressive, not at all like what I saw in Melbourne during COVID. They were doing their jobs and, in my opinion, doing it genuinely very well. And so we all stood there and we chanted our chants and held our signs. And then someone went to step through and go past the police. They were sort of pushing their luck a little bit. And the police officer sort of reached out their hand and perfectly professionally just said, look, I'm sorry, I can't let you past holding that sign. And I don't know the degree to which the holding that sign was a bit of a wink, wink and a nudge, nudge. You've got your tonic. Excellent. Brian was waiting on tonic to arrive. Well done to whomever has been the, I won't say the water boy, the tonic boy or the tonic girl, whoever you may be. So I don't. Son. Okay, he's the number one now, isn't he? So I don't know if there was a wink, wink and a nudge, nudge there or not. But basically, what the protester heard was, "Put down the sign, and I'll let you through." And so they did. They just put the sign on the ground, and then they just kind of went, and they walked through. And the police didn't move. They just let them walk straight through. And so that would just set off the entire crowd of 4,000 people. Everyone's just putting down their signs, zipping up their hoodies to cover the slogans on their shirts. If you didn't have a slogan on you, they weren't going to stop you. And so we ended up with about 4,000. I've got video footage on my Facebook page. This is December the 3rd and 4th, 2019. You can scroll all the way back in my videos on my Facebook page. I live streamed from it. We had thousands of people under the front awning of Parliament House. We didn't fit under the front awning. We were spilling out by a long way, chanting right at the front doors of Parliament House. And then so the federal police reformed up right on the front doors. And again, perfectly professional. There was no angst. There was no tension in the air. And I remember it really well. And this is the point of my story, talking about the shuffling of ministers and the changing of ministers. The water minister at the time was David Littleproud. Now I believe the deputy prime minister or the deputy leader of the Nationals, I can't remember, but a federal Nationals MP. He was the water minister at the time. We're there chanting, little proud, and it's just echoing. You can hear it. If Parliament House in Canberra has this sort of mezzanine level and it's kind of open up on that second level, and you could just hear it echoing back. It was just the most incredible thing. Meanwhile, David Littleproud was inside negotiating with a delegation of 4 of us that we'd sent in to negotiate with him, and he did his usual thing. Now, and when I say his usual thing, he did the political usual thing of saying what our negotiators wanted to hear, and then being able to say afterwards, "Oh no, I didn't actually say that. The words I used were these, which I interpret to mean this." But very sort of, in my opinion, deceptive behaviour. But what happened was I think it was only a few weeks later, he stepped down as the water minister, and Keith Pitt was elevated to the water ministry. Now, what happens when they do that, of course, is all of a sudden Keith Pitt turns around and says, guys, I'm brand new to the water ministry. Give me some time. Give me a couple of months just to wrap my head around what's going on here. I'm on your side. Really, I am. But just give me a little bit of time. And they buy time and they stall and they take all the heat and all the momentum out of whatever you'd built before. And so often they actually use that, exactly what you're talking about, where it's really the bureaucrats behind them. They're the ones that are really running the show. And they actually cynically use this rotation of ministers. As soon as it gets too hot, they just change out the minister, stall for time, and take the heat out of the issue.
Well, this is wonderful. This is exactly so. There's so many. Look, the Sir Humphrey Appleby, wasn't it, from Yes Minister?
Yes.
He had so many tricks to delay and prevaricate, and it was just wonderful to watch. And it's all exactly correct.
Yeah.
So this is what happens.
Yeah.
So we and the ordinary politicians, we don't really have a chance. As a minister, you haven't got a chance. So what chance do the backbenchers or the crossbench have?
Yeah, exactly.
So we're stuck.
Exactly.
So we've got a system there which is stuck in mud. It's immobile.
Yeah.
And it's moving forward in the direction which is not actually what we, the people, want or indeed need. We're not being served by our current system of government. Right. Should we change it? Hell yes.
Are you being served? Being another great British comedy. So it's not all doom and gloom though. So for those that are sitting here going, oh well, then why would we bother engaging with politics at all? There must be a reason why you said, okay, fine, I'll put my hand up. I'm going to go in to become an MP. You're old enough and you're wise enough. You've travelled enough. You've seen enough of the world. I'm sure you didn't go into that naively thinking that you could just get elected and change the world. So what was the motivation there? What was it that you did believe that you could achieve, and what are the things that you can do?
Well, first of all, you're right that people do expect, as an MP, you can now rule the world. You can just make a bill and bring the law in. You can't. It's not possible. I'll come back to that later as to why we don't have our bill ready yet. I went into politics basically because I was angry.
Right.
I'm a doctor, and I look at my patients coming in, and I'm seeing the utter horrible things that are happening to them. The domestic violence that is there, the oppression, the bullying at work, the how you manage with Centrelink, how you manage with the employers and HR, and all the problems that occur as a result of that, the food processing industry poisoning us. And so all I can do is give a pill. Next patient, please.
Can we put a pin in that and come back to the food industry, please? Can we just both try and remember we want to come back to the food industry later? Sorry, continue.
Okay. And so ultimately, I've been a doctor for many decades, and I thought to myself, when cannabis came in, this is a healthy, healing herb, which can be misused if you choose to, but it's a healthy, healing herb. Why, government, why are you making it difficult to me?
This can be misused. This can be misused. Sugar is misused every single day. Everything, yeah, exactly. Everything can be misused.
6,000 deaths a year due to this, 0 deaths due to cannabis. I mean, what's the big deal?
And I know some people that have tried pretty hard to overdose on cannabis and failed.
Well, they've tried to get an idea of the lethal dose of cannabis. They haven't yet found it, as far as I know. But look, take, for example, the question here of feeding hemp to cattle. Oh, it's dangerous. We're going to get THC in the meat and people will get high. Do you know how many cows you need to eat at one go to get one high? I mean, whole physical cows?
But also, sorry, please don't lose your place in what you're saying. But people not having any appreciation whatsoever of the different mechanisms involved in inhaling something versus drinking something versus eating something versus injecting something. Like people just assume, oh, if you smoke this, it'll make you high. Therefore, if I eat it, it'll have the same effect. That is not necessarily true at all. This is one of my bugbears.
Well, let's give an example. This is a bit of THC. Okay, a bit like you. And you can see how stupid I get in this program.
Yeah.
You're not. Yeah. Well, I hope not, at least. We'll see.
We'll see. Stay tuned, everybody.
Yeah, we have a simple vape with THC. It's a sativa dominant, but it's still a lot of THC in there. Now, the difference is between medicinal and recreational cannabis is actually just the dose.
Right. Okay.
And most people who are using cannabis illicitly are using it to treat what we as doctors have failed to treat.
Right.
And then they get punished for treating what others have failed to treat. It makes no sense. I'll tell you a story.
Sure.
A real story.
Yeah.
This girl comes to me. Now, she is in her early 20s. She's been sexually abused as a child. She has got PTSD. She has agoraphobia. She is in a terrible state. Mentally, she's got depression, anxiety, and this PTSD, with there's flashbacks and nightmares, and she can't get her life together. Her father is growing cannabis in the backyard to treat her, and the cannabis is actually helping with the symptoms quite nicely. Well, the police find out. They arrest the father, they arrest her. Now, bearing in mind, she's been sexually abused as a child, an ongoing horrible PTSD. They put her in the back of the paddy wagon, they transport her to a police station, and there they strip search her. How is that helping social order? How is it helping anyone? This is happening all over our country in many different forms, and we, as the people, we actually allow it. So I went into Parliament because I was no longer prepared to play that game, make a change. Now, I went into Parliament and I knew we had a huge Labour majority. We couldn't do anything there. At least in my naivety, I thought so. Actually, we've made actually a lot of changes. We've normalized cannabis in the upper house. I have tabled paper after paper showing the science behind cannabis, showing how it's used for good, how we all need cannabinoids for our endocannabinoid system. So now we've normalized it. If we could only do that in the medical fraternity and in the general public, we'd now be able to transition to legalizing cannabis. What else should we do? What about moving to the psychedelics, which are far better for depression, far better for PTSD? We're talking curative PTSD. Within 6 months, 85% cure. And you, government, tell us we can't do that because it's dangerous for us. So a vet is killing themselves every 2 weeks. There's 8 or 9 suicides a day. We're happy with that. But these drugs, which don't kill people, actually, are dangerous. We can't have them. Who? what planet are these people on?
Mm.
And so that's why I got into Parliament, because I'm not prepared to play that game of just accepting the idiocies.
Mm.
And what other idiocies do we have? Where else is government lying to us? Well, you tell me.
Goodness, it's a long list. Okay, so you've given me a perfect segue to move into sort of libertarianism. So you publicly declare that you are a libertarian. I publicly declare that I'm a libertarian, which historically, what that means, two libertarians talking to each other, we have to finish tonight hating each other's guts and calling each other communists. Okay, that's just the rule. We can't two libertarians in the one podcast is one libertarian too many. But you've touched on a really important point here, that we have to, whenever we try to fix any of these problems, such as, fix the problem of drug use, we have to look at the consequences of our solution. And this was one of the things that really started to bring me around, because I was raised as a conservative. And as a conservative, all drugs are bad. Drugs are bad, okay, right? That whole kind of attitude, just say no, just don't do drugs. And it was, funnily enough, it was in my it was actually as a result of being in the Army Reserves for a while, that was the moment of being, I call it breaking off the pier. It's a stupid analogy. I liken people's mindsets to an oyster stuck to rocks or attached to a pier, right? You can go down in a car with a bucket and you can wade out into the water with a pair of pliers and you can peel them off the pier and put them in the bucket and drive them home. Now, that might be a 100-kilometer drive, but the drive is easy and the walking with the bucket's not that hard. The hardest bit is actually breaking them off their current position. And it's the same with people's ideas. Right? It's actually, it's people think too much about, I need to tell this person about what they should think over here. No. Just spend time with them until you can crack them off their existing position in any way, shape or form. That's actually the greatest service that you can do for someone, is have them have that moment where they realize that what they already believed was wrong. That was the Army for me. I was in the Army Reserves. I'm not claiming any status out of that. I was in the reserves and never deployed, never saw combat, none of that. But I saw behind the curtain. Right, I saw, in conservative circles, growing up in a conservative household, you venerate the military, you venerate, that whole organization. And yes, our veterans are due an enormous amount of respect, but as an organization, they're about as good as Centrelink. Right, organizationally, they are no more special than any other organization that we have, large government bureaucracy. And I saw it, and that broke me away from this conservative sort of worship of government. And then I began to question a lot of things, and I questioned the war on drugs. And this, coming back to your point, this was what I realized, was you can simultaneously believe that drugs can be very, very bad and destructive in people's lives when used wrong, and recognize that the war on drugs is doing even more harm. And that for me was that revelation where I just went, aha. It's not that I'm in support of people using drugs, although I've learned a lot since then about the medicinal uses and so forth. I'm going back 20 years now. It's not that I'm in support of people using drugs necessarily. It's that I recognize the amount of damage that we're doing by giving the government that sort of power to be strip searching young women in prisons, in police stations, because their dad was growing a cannabis plant. What about in New South Wales? We saw time and time again drug dogs indicating drugs on school-aged girls that were then getting searched behind just makeshift little curtains at major train stations in Sydney. This was happening just a couple of years ago. Like, this is horrific. This is traumatizing for the girls that it's being done to. It's degrading. And it's what an opportunity for any pervert who's managed to, weasel their way into the ranks of the police force. What an opportunity for them. And all in the name of stopping drugs.
It's a huge problem. Let's go back to the police just now, because what we have is a war on drugs. Sure. And it is a failing war on drugs. It's a failed war on drugs.
Yeah.
Consider, if you're in an army and you're losing the battle, what's going to happen to the morale of the forces?
Not good.
Now, we've got the police force here, and in WA at least, they're leaving the force in droves. But we need
same in Victoria
to manage because there's pretty bad people in society. So who is going to volunteer to go into the police force? Will it be the moral guys who are trying to do the good job? Or will it be the psychopaths and the ones who get off on power? I have the badge here, I've got the uniform, you do what I tell you. So what we've got now is a police force which is being stacked with people who you don't really want to have in power, carrying a gun and controlling what you do.
Yeah.
So what we've now got is a police force which is actually detrimental to the well-being of society. Portugal, on the other hand, they decriminalized all drugs in 2000.
Yeah.
The police changed. They were ones who said, listen, do you have a problem? How can we help you? Let's get you some help.
Yeah.
So what happened is suicides went down, mental health improved, alcoholism went down, the GDP improved, and the policing became more socially responsible.
Yeah.
Do we want that? And if we do, then why are we holding on to a course which is causing the very opposite? I gave a speech in Parliament just a few months ago about this very thing. Give me an example anywhere of prohibition actually working. There isn't one. Now, I searched extensively. There's about 8 examples of where banning something did work. For example, barbiturates are no longer available, just easily available. Where they've been replaced with the safer benzodiazepines, which are really dangerous, but not as dangerous as barbiturates. Leaded petrol, you can't get now. So there hasn't, these things, but things like banning alcohol failed in America. And what did it do? It increased crime because the price for prohibition is going to be you give the power to the criminals. Criminals do not have your best intents at heart.
Newsflash, everybody. Criminals do not have your best intent at heart. But this is a great point. Well, I mean, the same situation in Victoria is happening as what you describe in WA. A lot of the good officers are leaving Victoria Police in droves. They have a massive recruiting crisis. They cannot get new officers to sign up. And honestly, I wouldn't sign up. But coming to the issue, coming to the issue of prohibition, we have a situation right now, thanks to the amount of tax that is applied to tobacco. I actually don't know what it is with the latest increase, but prior to the last increase, which I believe was another 10% on top, it was, I believe, 1,750 Australian dollars per kilo of tobacco, which meant that typically in a cigar, around about 2/3 of the cost. So I import my own cigars. I have a business partner in Sydney. We import cigars and we supply them to people that enjoy smoking with us on a Wednesday night. We do a show where we smoke cigars once a month, and we send them out and we all smoke the same cigar. For what we pay, about 2/3 of that cost is tax. 1/3 of the price of our cigars is the actual cost of the cigar being bought from the US typically, and the shipping and the insurance on the shipping and everything else adds up to about 1/3, and the remaining 2/3 is actually just tax. Now, rewind some years. Now, the argument, of course, is, oh, but you're costing us a lot of money in the medical system. You're costing us because of lung cancers and throat cancers and tongue cancers and so on and so forth. And certainly in the case of cigarettes, there is a case to be made there. I'm no fan of cigarettes myself. I think it's very, very clear that they have a causative link with an increase in cancers. I think the science is well and truly in on that point. But it was David Leyonhjelm. I don't know if you were sort of involved in politics around that time when he was a federal senator for New South Wales. He did a speech called "Thank You for Smoking," in which he produced data that showed that smokers were actually paying 13 times more in tobacco tax than what they were costing in all of the various cancers and so forth that could be attributed to smoking, which is quite an extraordinary ratio. We've gone well beyond the point where we're simply asking smokers to pay for the cost of their own medical care and rehabilitation. It's become quite punitive. It's become almost a religious, a virtuous, a new type of sort of Puritanism, if I can put it that way. Now, I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I know you're not a particular fan of smoking in principle.
I am a rabid anti-smoker. That goes for cannabis too, by the way, which I think is the worst way of taking cannabis. The reason for that is that cigarettes, they killed my father at 50, and my mother, well, she died at 80, which is a good age, but she lost a lot of quality of life.
Right.
Her family, they used to die at 95. So the genes were good there. So 15 years of lost life and another 10 years of lost quality of life. I'm all in favor. Now, I'm a libertarian. I think you should be free to do what you want, when you want, how you want. Just don't hurt anyone else.
Sure. I assure you there is no one else in the room with me breathing my secondhand smoke.
Yes. But the thing is, this is a principle. I think I've yet to find someone who disagrees with that point of view.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, the issue about how do you control something which is bad for your health, should it be by prohibition or taxing it out of existence, or is it going to be by simply educating people of better options? Why do people smoke? Well, it changes their mind, doesn't it? It enhances your thought process to some degree. How else could you do that? And there's plenty of better, well, I don't say better, but there's different ways of actually improving, enhancing the quality of life without damaging your wellness. But let's take, for example, a nice piece of food. Let's say a nice steak. Could that enhance your well-being? Yes, it certainly could.
Yeah.
With a glass of wine as well? Well, now we're talking, yeah, a glass of wine, fine. How about a whole bottle of wine? What about 2 steaks? So it's a question here about choosing choose your poison, and then live with that. Uh, Everything has got a downside. Everything's got an upside. Smoking, for example, I've yet to find for medicinal purposes any upside. But from the social side, people would say, yes, I appreciate that. I like that. It's only when they come off smoking and they discover that they can taste the food better, that they can breathe better, they can run better, that the quality of life there improves. So it's making your choices, but being aware of what the price is.
So it's an interesting. I'll make a medical defense of cigar smoking for you, and it's strictly based on mental health and sort of mental well-being, but also so I find the best conversations that I ever have with people is over a cigar. Sit down with someone in person, typically just the two of you, maybe 3, maybe 4. But as soon as there's more than 4, it sort of, I think that the benefit diminishes. But when you're there with just one other person and you light up a cigar each and you start smoking the cigar, number one, it gives you something to do with your fingers. And let's remember, and I'm going to make some gross generalizations here. I know you're going to be deeply offended at my sexist generalizations here. But as a general rule, as a generalization, women are much better at just catching up for a chat than what we are. They can sit down across from each other at a table and have a cup of tea and talk. Blokes need another activity most of the time. We go to the footy, we go to the pub, we go fishing. We have to be, Pete's going to come around and help me do this particular project in the backyard. While that's happening, the talking happens. And the talking's really important, right? Now, cigars are a very, very good activity to give to blokes. Now, one, it's the pragmatic aspect of just there's something to do, there's something to talk about and focus on. Oh, what do you think? And, are you having some trouble with that? Let's, whatever. But also the soothing effect of nicotine in the system has a tremendously positive effect. And in my experience, and now I say this as someone who's never done marijuana, I've never taken a single illegal drug in my life. It's just the nature of who I am. I just haven't, right? So I don't have those things as reference points, but what I can say is that the best conversations that I've had in my life have been over a cigar. There's something about it that the walls come down and people kind of get past a lot of the superficial stuff and really talk about what they actually need to be talking about. There's just something magical about it. And maybe there's other ways to get there, but I haven't found them. And so I know when I can see that some of my guy friends are struggling and they need to talk, I invite them over for a cigar because I know it works and it just breaks down those walls every single time.
Well, it may surprise you to know that I don't particularly mind cigars as a substitute for other activities. The quantity that you'll smoke is going to be less, unless you're Winston Churchill, of course. Leave that at 90.
I don't have his budget.
But it's simply less dangerous. The cigarettes is really the problem. And what really, it pisses me off. The story about why cigarettes became so popular actually comes back to the First World War, when they were given out to the soldiers in the trenches as part of their rations. So if you're going to be in such stress, you're going to go over the top in 5 minutes. Okay, this may be your last breath on earth. Let's calm the nerves a bit. So what happens is the survivors came back, all addicted to cigarettes, and all the young folks said, "You're my hero."
Yeah.
So they wanted to emulate them.
Yeah, right.
Okay? Which goes back, you can even take it further. Do you know why we have public health, at least from the UK?
I don't know the specific history, no.
The reason was because when they were calling up men, drafting men to go to the front to get shot to pieces, there weren't enough fit men to go because of tuberculosis or rickets or that kind of stuff. So they brought in public health to ensure that the health of men is sufficient to turn them into cannon fodder.
Wow. We're going to make you well so you can get your leg blown off.
Exactly so.
Oh,
and the cigarettes was exactly the same thing as well. And the Second World War was just the same. Where cigarettes was part of your ration. So again, the kids coming back in the 50s were emulating our heroes. We're emulating the heroes from Korea, emulating the heroes from Vietnam, who now were taking heroin and marijuana and other things as well, because they were put in a situation where they had to get the nerves controlled. And it was funded by the government. Your Benzedrine, your stimulants for being able to fly a second or third sortie and not crash your plane. Wow. And, you're going to come back damaged because of what you said and seen and do, but also what the government's given you.
Yeah.
And then we're going to blame them.
Well, I mean, I believe it's true. I've read history books that talk about this as if it's true, that the Germans and even I believe it was the Finnish, or maybe the Swedes, but I think it was the Finnish, were issuing methamphetamines to certain corps, certain of their soldiers, in order to just have them march for days or weeks on end. And there's the story of, I believe, and I'm going to butcher the story, I apologize, but I believe there was a Finnish soldier that had the entire ration of methamphetamines for his section, and he got separated during combat and he wasn't able to re-find his section. And so he just started popping the methamphetamines, and he became known as the demon of the mountains or something like that. The Germans had a phrase for him because he was so off his nut that he would just go and do crazy things and just, cutting German soldiers' throats and single-handed raiding their little outposts and so forth. Then eventually connected back up with the Finnish army about 13 days later, having lost about 25 kilos of body mass, and like the guy was an absolute train wreck. But the methamphetamines had given him almost sort of superhuman status while they worked. I mean, there is a short-term benefit there if you're willing to just completely sacrifice the health of your men.
Well, absolutely. But what I have seen, of course, is methamphetamine in the emergency department, where they are superhuman and they're beating up the nurses and doctors. Or
that's the other side.
The shards of glass.
Yeah. Wow.
Or, wrecking your ED station, so the trauma coming in can't be treated. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But methamphetamine is really powerful. But do you know what? It makes people think they're having a really good time. If you're in a shit place, okay, one of the best things you can do for yourself is take a hit of methamphetamine, and all of a sudden you're like, the world is your own.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So you're managing, and then of course you come down again to your shit life, and then you're going to want more. Yeah. It's incredibly powerful, and so we've got to make an allowance for the habit here. What I can't make allowance for is the stupidity of banning THC on the work site, so that rather than taking THC, they now go back home, have a 2 weeks blinder on methamphetamine, and come back to work wrecked.
All right,
addicted.
There was a great question earlier. Now, I actually misread this question when it first came up. So this is from John Nelson. He says, question, how dangerous is vaping compared to smoking? And we'll come to that in just a sec, if we can. But I misread that as how dangerous is vaping compared to skiing. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that skiing is going to be an awful lot more dangerous to your health than vaping. I've never met someone who said I was vaping and then I broke both of my legs. I've never had that conversation. So, John, thank you for your question. Brian, do you have any, I mean, I know there is data out there and I know I'm familiar with some of it, but what's your understanding of this vaping versus smoking comparison, irrespective of what's being vaped?
Well, funny you should ask that, because I was having this conversation with a politician in Queensland just the other day. Now, I tabled a paper from the UK, 1,400 pages of evidence that if we translate it into WA, 200 lives would be saved every year.
Wow.
Vaping is much safer than smoking smoking cigarettes.
Yep.
And we know this. Now, we know this from the US, from Canada, from Europe, UK, and New Zealand as well. So this colleague of mine from Queensland said, oh, vaping is bad. We had a select committee. And what she's saying is that our science here, contradicting every single other country in the world, our science is better. And it says that vaping is bad. Now, what we're seeing here, of course, is that if you're going to ban vapes, what's going to happen? You're going to get illegal vapes brought in from China. Those are bad. You don't want those. They are toxic. Not just with look, you're going from 5 milligrams of nicotine to 50 or 60 milligrams, which will hook you in a second, okay? But you're also getting a whole host of chemicals you do not want in your body. Whereas the legalized vape shops, they control that, and we can have a far safer experience and getting people off tobacco and indeed diverting people from tobacco. Now what they're saying in Western Australia is, yeah, you can go and buy cigarettes. We don't want you to, but you can, because we're going to make vaping difficult.
Yeah. Now, I believe I'm correct in saying that the British, I think it's the Royal College of Surgeons, they call it over there, basically their peak medical body, has come to the conclusion that vaping is at least 95% safer than smoking. And I believe I'm correct in saying that. And if I recall correctly, the reason they said at least is because they think it might be 98, 99% safer, but they can't be absolutely certain. But they are absolutely certain that it is at least 95% safer, and possibly more so. So that would be the sort of the ultimate answer to that question. Now,
well, that's my view as well. But the question is, how come this particular select committee from that particular parliament is suggesting that all the other science is wrong, only ours is correct?
Yeah.
I mean, and then it comes out as official. This is what the government has agreed to.
Yeah.
It's much like if you go back to, well, take COVID, for example. We know that this will save your lives. It'll stop transmission. It'll stop infection. Bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
But the government said, so this is the evidence that we have. Same thing. So we're talking here about untruths being propagated, and the general public doesn't actually understand that what's being said doesn't make any sense.
Well, before we go down a COVID rabbit hole, because my listeners have certainly heard me do that many times before, there's no need to retread that ground. I was reading a little bit about you, about your history, about your background, and to say that it's cosmopolitan would have to be the ultimate understatement. Correct me if I get anything wrong, but you were born in, was it Singapore or Thailand? Malaysia, excuse me. You were born in Malaysia to Scottish parents. You went to school in Australia, and you've since practiced medicine on how many different continents?
Oh, well, look, Europe, Asia, and Australia. England, Scotland, Germany, Russia, China, Hong Kong, and Australia.
Yeah, so when you say like Europe, Asia, like there's more, I mean, Russia and China and Hong Kong, they're not the same thing. They're the Asian continent. I get that, but they're not the same thing. They're not the same place. Now, this wasn't just any old Russia. This is what caught my eye. This was Russia before the fall of the Soviet Union. How does a Western trained doctor end up working in Russia? Talk me through that.
Okay, well, I was working as a GP in Germany, and in Germany, you've got a lot of freedom actually to do what you trust yourself to do. But I found at the end of, say, 10 years, I was bored because I could see where I get buried. I've reached the pinnacle of my career. I'm bored. So Russia had need of doctors. So, okay, fine, I'll do that. So I was invited to be a doctor for a group of young people who are builders. Now, the story behind these people is that waiting for a car can take 15 years for a ladder. Waiting for an apartment, you stay with your parents, it's really pokey accommodation. So waiting for an apartment, another 15, 20 years. So they said, sod this for a game of soldiers, we're going to build our own. So they built 4 high-rise. And they wanted a doctor on the site there to look after them. So I said, yeah, fine, I'll do that. So I went out there to find they got another doctor, and I was superfluous.
Oh, no.
So I ended up as a doctor for a glass factory and also a part-time lecturer at the university.
Wow. So how does that even work though? Like the Soviet Union fascinates me for so many different reasons, and I've read so many biographies and bits and pieces. Were you volunteering to work for Soviet wages? I mean, how does that work for you financially? How is that a step forward for you?
It ruined me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I was earning rubles as a Russian in the Soviet Union, being looked at as a Russian and treated as a Russian. In fact, I had the KGB on my shoulder.
How long were you there for?
Just a year.
Okay.
But it was a very instructive year.
Yeah, I'll bet. A fast learning experience. Oh, goodness. So at some point you practiced medicine in China as well. And I attempted a very bad joke pre-show with you about, does that make you a doctor of Chinese medicine? I won't try and actually re-deliver the joke because it'll go down just as badly as it did last time. But what was that like then? I mean, this is an entirely different system. When were you there, and what was that like?
I arrived in Hong Kong in 1996 and was sent out to China to do occasional jobs, so in Shanghai, for example. But mostly it was Hong Kong. And I went there initially to help build the airport, Chek Lap Kok Airport. So I was looking after the doctors and nurses who were building the airport, or helping the workers building the airport. There were 20,000 workers offshore, an hour and a half to the nearest emergency.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
So
yeah.
Deaths on site and major issues. And of course, people living in barges off the island. So they didn't have anyone else but the general practice or the surgical practice on the island. That was what I was looking after. Then I settled into general practice in Hong Kong. And then I said, right, I'm going independent. I'll do my own business. So I did. And of course, in between, I married a Chinese woman and went to China to just, her father actually was an eminent ENT surgeon.
Right.
Who pioneered the northwest of China. And thought I was totally mad.
So how does that work then in terms of recognition of your degrees, etc.? I know that, for example, immigrants that come over here from places like Vietnam or China, etc., it can be quite challenging for them to get their qualifications recognized here in Australia, depending on the particulars of their individual circumstances. What was it like for you? Because you were qualified elsewhere, did you get your qualifications in Australia?
Scotland.
In Scotland, okay. So you're qualified in Scotland, which is a very good medical system and very well respected. Was it just automatic and assumed you knew what you were doing and you could come in, or did you have to prove something to them?
When I moved to Germany, of course, it was the European Union, so we had permission to work in all the countries, just speak the language.
Right.
Russia, they didn't really care because I was another pair of hands. When I went to Hong Kong, at that time, it was still in British hands. So my British degree was valid. I was grandfathered in.
Yeah.
And after the Chinese took over, I was still a doctor there on the medical board. So going into China was just a natural thing to do.
Right.
No problems. I used to work for say, SOS. I worked for the International, but it was still looking after a lot of Chinese citizens in China.
Yeah. All right. So we were talking off air, and we actually talked when I did the interview with you on the Aussie Wire off air, not as part of that interview. We talked about the fact that within the world of libertarians, there are some issues that tend to split the whole movement down the middle. I consider myself a libertarian. You consider yourself a libertarian, but that doesn't actually mean that we agree on absolutely everything. And in fact, some of the areas where we might find ourselves disagreeing can be pretty fundamental. So I thought it would be fun because I like your vibe. I like the cut of your jib, if I can use a maritime analogy, for us to actually deliberately pick a fight with each other and see where see what fun we can have on the opposite side of a couple of issues that are very divisive, are often handled in very bad faith, and people can really be destructive in the way that they debate these issues. But these are real and live issues within the libertarian community. So I'm going to kick off with probably the number one issue that starts a thread of doom on any libertarian page. The minute someone mentions this topic, you just know it's going to fill up with comments and nothing constructive is going to happen. And that is the issue of human abortion, and whether it is a human right of a mother to have an abortion if that's what they want, or whether it's the human right of a fetus, an unborn child, a baby, whatever label you want to give to it, to then be born once it's been sort of conceived. This would have to be, and I've seen survey after survey on this in Australia, the UK, and other parts of the world. Within self-identifying libertarians, this appears to be an issue that pretty much splits it right down the middle. There is always, it might be 45-55. That might be the biggest sort of diversion away from just a 50-50 split that you're likely to see on this particular issue. Now, you're a medical doctor, and from what you've said, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting your position here, from what you've said, you're on the side that says that abortion is a mother's right. It's a human right to the mother to be able to terminate a pregnancy if they so choose. Can you talk me through that? And from a medical perspective and from an ethical perspective as a libertarian, how have you arrived at that being your conclusion?
Okay, well, I think if we look at the first thing here, which is if you were to take an embryo, fertilized embryo, and freeze it for 20 years, you could then make a child. You take that child, which is now born out of the womb, freeze that, you've killed it.
Sure.
They're different organisms.
Okay.
You can look at an embryo, and this is actually really interesting. You can look at an embryo, and you're not going to know, am I looking at a salmon, a lamb, or a human? Because they look exactly the same. In fact, you can see round about here, there's structures in your body which represent the ancient gills that we used to have.
So this is based on, what's his name? There was research done by a chap who published a series of drawings. This is before photographs. He published a series of drawings claiming that embryos essentially went through the stages of evolution, the salamander and so on and so forth. Now, that's been quite roundly debunked as far as I'm aware. Those drawings were not actually accurate to the developmental stages of an embryo itself. Is there anything that I'm missing on that?
Yes, the pictures, the actual physical pictures of the embryo are very, very similar. There are differences. A skilled person can see the differences, but for all intents and purposes, you're looking at the same organism. Now, DNA-wise, very, very different. But how come we've got a pig with 99.8% of human DNA?
Yeah, very visually a very, very different creature. So that's, to me, that's
not all politicians, though.
Yeah, let's not go there. So to me, that's interesting medically, but it doesn't really cut to the heart of this question, I guess. So let's draw some boundaries around the conversation so that we don't just end up sprawling off in every direction. Let's draw some boundaries. Up to what point would you consider human abortion to still be acceptable? Are you a full term for any reason type of person? Is that your position, or is there a cutoff sort of age for an embryo where you would say, look, after this point, it's probably not quite the same thing?
Well, that's pretty interesting because I don't know of a single doctor, nurse, midwife who supports anything like full-term abortion. It just doesn't happen in medicine. I know people have said that, but it doesn't. It might have happened in China, okay? But that would have been roundly despised by any healthcare practitioner anywhere else.
Interesting.
So they were enforcing the one-child policy.
Yeah, interesting. I can think of people who, if I brought them on for a slow chat, would disagree fairly strongly and would claim to have statistics showing that full-term abortions or late-term abortions, third trimester abortions do take place in Victoria and elsewhere.
Oh, now late-term abortions is quite another thing.
Right.
Okay. So looking at the trimesters there, the thing is that when you have an embryo, which it looks like a salmon, it's less of an issue to abort that from just the human depiction of what's going on.
Mm.
When they get to about 15, 16 weeks, you're seeing a human, although very, very strange.
Yeah, a tiny, weird-shaped human, but yes.
That's a definite baby, okay? Now, the question is, how do you feel about aborting a child at 23 weeks? Now, this is a really emotive topic.
Sure, and this is why it's hard to have a good discussion on it, is because it is so emotive. So the objective here is hopefully just to have a non-emotive discussion about it.
It's difficult.
Difficult to do.
I'll give you an example. I used to work in the early pregnancy loss unit. So women who are losing their baby at 8 or 9 weeks of pregnancy, which happens about 10% of cases.
Sure.
They were experiencing a bereavement.
Absolutely.
As if it was actually your father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter.
Yeah.
It was a bereavement, every bit as much. Now, everybody else had no clue. The husband or the partner, the staff, all they saw was this piece of tissue is gone, you're fixed now, off you go and live your life.
Right.
She was bereaved. Now, that's with a non-human looking embryo. How much worse is it going to be for a 23-week-old fetus? Now, why would you want to do that? I don't know of anyone who does that for light-hearted reasons. It certainly isn't for sex assessment. At least not in any Western ethical position at all. Sure. I don't know of any doctor who would approve of that, nor should they. But if you have now got a child with, say, absent kidneys, a child with complete loss of, let's say, the heart is completely malformed, or they've got there's no brain functioning, or only half a brain, do you want to bring that child to term, to have it die in your arms as a fully formed baby? And this is what's actually being expected of women in America. Do you want to do that? Now, some women do, and that is their perfect and good right. There, I'm libertarian. You want to do that? You do that. We will help you all the way. If you're not prepared to do that, we'll not do that, and I'll help you all the way. So again, this libertarian approach. So
for the purposes of understanding, kind of drawing a bit of a boundary around the topic of what we're actually, of where the disagreement lies, I guess, you mentioned, birth defects, where it really is quite clear that this child is not going to survive post-birth more than X number of hours, maybe X number of days. Would you support an abortion in an instance where let's say a mother has gotten to 20 weeks or so? There's nothing medically wrong that's identifiable with the baby itself, but the mother is in emotional trauma or for other reasons doesn't want to continue with the pregnancy. I mean, I guess really what I'm trying to discern is in your mind, at what point does that unborn child, fetus, whatever label we give it, actually have rights in its own right to be able to say, no, this is now a child and it has the right to go to full term?
Now, there I would actually support the idea of having a doctor who is actually going to be doing the procedure saying, no, can't do this. This doesn't fit the criteria. Right. Because there are criteria which are needed for abortion to happen, especially after 20 weeks. Now, take, for example, Down's syndrome. You might say, and I would agree, that a Down's child, when born, can be the most beautiful thing in the world. But it is an awful lot of work, emotional, physical, financial work. But you may not be prepared to do because for many, many reasons. It'll ruin your life. So I would agree with your right to abort that child, but support that right to give birth to that child. It's a beautiful child.
So I come at it. Sorry.
I would see, for example, if a woman comes to me at 21 weeks and the partner has abandoned her, left her, she is bereft. So she's got nothing at all. Should I then say, we'll abort the child? Or should I then say, look, there's groups to help you here. They've got a family there. You've got a full life ahead of you. You've got a beautiful child there, which you can actually just raise and nurture. The psychological support there. That would be a case for actually giving full support. But if she then at 21 weeks discovers that there's a major problem there, I see no reason why you shouldn't say, I don't like that. The women don't like it, but they'd prefer to take this option rather than the worse option.
So the point you raised there about support is a really important one. And this is an area where, people like myself, Christian, raised as a conservative, now libertarian, but still Christian, I'm a Christian libertarian. This is an area where I think we need to do a lot better. And historically, we've done terribly poorly at this. And when, this is how we support women who find themselves with an unwanted pregnancy, for whatever reason that may be, out of wedlock. They were in a relationship and the partner said, no, I'm out of here. I'm not going to become a dad. Financial hardship, parents aren't coping, whatever the reason may be. There's a lot of different reasons why a young woman can find themselves sitting there going, this pregnancy is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I think one of the things that, especially people like myself, who, I consider myself a Christian, we need to do a much better job of actually getting alongside these people rather than condemning them, getting alongside these people and saying, hey, there's support here for you. You're not going to go hungry. Your child's not going to go hungry. There is a life ahead of you. All of that side of things, I think we need to do a much better job of.
I would agree entirely. I often say to people who say there should be no abortion at all, I say, how many children have you adopted or fostered?
Okay.
How are you paying from your income for their education?
You're absolutely right. However, I will add, and I suspect we'll probably be in agreement on this point, that that adoption has been made so expensive and so difficult. And I do understand there need to be some safeguards there. There are people who might want to adopt a child for the wrong reasons. And that is an area, we can't just have an open door to human trafficking. It's not often that I actually concede that we might need to have some oversight over any area of life. But that's probably one where we want to have some people just kind of looking over the shoulder and going, who are these people that want a child? However, adoption has been made so expensive and so slow and so challenging for parents that unfortunately, children that could be adopted into a loving home often will find themselves being bounced around the foster system. And foster care, as my own auntie, who was a foster carer for many years, they do an incredible job and they do important work under very difficult circumstances. But it's a traumatic thing for a child to be put through foster homes and bounced around before finally being adopted at some older age.
Oh, yes. I'm thinking of a family in my area where I practice as a GP who have fostered, I don't know how many people, their children, often 6 or 7 at a time.
Yeah.
What wonderful people they are.
Yeah.
But I also see how those children have come to a place of safety and security, are then ripped from that security to go back to their parents to face a life of drug addicts or alcoholics or just people who are socially just inept.
Yeah.
To then be brought up in catastrophic conditions, and the justification being because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Look, my own son became very good friends with a girl that was being fostered up the road from us during COVID. And don't tell anyone I said this, but they used to play with each other during lockdowns. Shh. And she was a troubled kid. Like, this was a kid that had been bounced around a number of different homes before finally ending up for a number of years in a row with this one carer. She was, I think by then she was 7, but she was 7 going on 17. And it was really quite heartbreaking to kind of see. And one of the issues that we had was once she became friends with my son was that she would just show up at our front door. And we were, not a long walk, but it was not a walk that a 7-year-old kid should be taking herself on from her house to ours. And what happened was DHS got back involved and the foster mum was, hauled over the coals for not properly caring for her child because she quite literally couldn't secure the home against this girl getting out. She had deadlocks, she had hidden keys, hidden her own keys and so forth. And this girl would find ways. She would pop open windows and remove fly screens and crawl through. She was 7 going on 17 and she was going to be free. She was going to go and do whatever it was that she had in her mind that she was going to do. Incredibly challenging circumstances. And then because she was under the foster system, DHS got back involved again and ripped her out of the arms of this woman that had loved her for 2.5 years straight and was doing the best she could under very trying circumstances with a very challenging girl on her hands, and sent her off to live with someone else.
I have to confess, I have a passionate hatred of Department of Child Protection. I have witnessed so much harm being caused by people who professed to do the right thing. of examples. Well, there was this baby was brought into ED, malnourished. It was dehydrated, malnourished, 3 weeks old. Came back in 6 weeks later, 6 weeks. I've got pictures of this baby here. Skin fold, you could pinch together,
Wow.
dehydrated, malnourished. It's on this way out. It looked like a refugee from Sudan. Now, the mother was a drug addict, and she'd gone off to Perth for a binge of drugs and left behind her children, 7 something down to this infant. The grandmother, who was caring for them, was schizophrenic and she did not know how to use a bottle of milk.
Wow.
So my registrar calls up DCP, and she is given the runaround. Yes, we'll have a case meeting on Tuesday, next week, Tuesday. So she came to me in tears. What do I do? Now, I am not the most tolerant of doctors. I don't suffer fools gladly. So I got onto the DCP and I was brutal with them. I said, I want to know your names, because when the child dies, and it will die, I want your name in front of the coroner. Now, what that does, probably nothing much, because the coroner tends to say, off you go.
Yeah.
But they said, you don't speak like that. I said, listen, there's a child dying in my ED just now, and you're refusing to come and see that child and take care of it. So I'm going to treat you the way I think you need to be treated. So eventually they came out. They were talking 4:30 on an afternoon and saw this child. Then they realized, oh, this child is near death. And we've been named as the people responsible. So they said, okay, fine, we'll take care of this child. Tomorrow, we'll remove this child from mother. I said, well, that's not good enough. I flew the child off RFDS to Perth Children's Hospital. And with a very stern letter explaining my thoughts about the DCP, I got a call and an email and a letter back. And they were actually basically saying, yes, there was a laughter there. Finally, someone has done the right thing and put these people in their place, because that child would have died. The other 3 children were given back to the mother.
Yeah, wow. Wow.
So that 7-year-old, at that time, 7-year-old, where is that 7-year-old child now? It's probably 14, 15 now. What has it experienced? So we're planning to put children out there who have been abused in a number of unspeakable ways. And then we expect them to actually be normal members of society and contribute and behave as you and I would want to behave. It's not possible. I've come across, there's another example. A girl was being sexually abused at school, the boy, and the sexual attacks were increasing. So we could know at some stage this girl is going to be raped. So I mandatory report that to DCP. And they say, what's the girl's name? No, the girl is not, she's the one being attacked. It's the boy. What's the girl's name? This went on for some time. So listen, what has to happen for you to take account of the boy who needs care? He's a young boy, he's about 10 or 11. He needs to be taken into care. He needs to be taught that the behavior, the sexualization at 10 years old is simply not acceptable. And the answer was that boy needs to physically rape the girl, call the police, and then the DCP will take that child. So predictable. And they were refusing to take action. This is what we've got. These are the bureaucrats we've got. They justify it. They run rings around the coroner, and everyone gets the blame except themselves. And what ends up with is children in our society who are a danger to themselves and others, causing all kinds of problem because we haven't done our. This breaks my heart. Another reason why I'm in Parliament.
Yeah,
so
look,
I think you and I would agree on that.
No, I 100%. And it's a really difficult area, because as a libertarian, I'm very hesitant to give the government any sort of power. And yet it is unquestionable that there are parents out there that are treating their children in ways that no normal human being would find acceptable. And yet they do.
But I have got examples of DCP collaborating with the police to make a false report against the father, putting him into prison.
Wow. Okay.
So when you said about libertarian, they're giving too much power.
Yeah.
So we're not going to have an agreement, disagreement on that yet. We need to find something more meaty.
Yeah. Well, look, yes, we're going to have to find something to have a proper argument about. Before we get there, this is a different thing to the child protection side of it, but it's a related thing. Many years ago, I was on a tram heading into South Melbourne for various reasons, and I had headphones in playing music. I'd only recently started doing that, and this was the last time I ever did that in public. I'm sitting on the tram, one of those double trams articulated in the middle trams that we have in Melbourne. And I remember thinking, oh, we've been stuck at this stop for a while. Why haven't we moved for a while? And then I started paying attention, and the people's faces facing backwards. I was near the front of the tram and I was facing the front of the tram. The people's faces there were very strange. And I pulled the earphones out thinking, what am I looking at? I don't understand. And I heard this unmistakable thwack, thwack, thwack kind of sound, this sort of this tenderizer striking meat kind of sound. And I thought, what is that? And I looked over my shoulder, and nothing in my half of the tram seemed strange. And then you've got the narrowing of the passage where the articulation is, and then it opens back out into the rest of the tram. And I'm just trying to put together in my head, I don't understand what's going on. And the tram driver gets out and rushes past me. I'm looking over my shoulder trying to understand. And then the tram driver comes rushing back again. I'm like, something's very wrong. And I feel like no one else is moving, no one else apart from the tram driver. And I'm like, I'm just going to go and have a look, because there might be something going on that needs someone to do something. And I get the feeling that no one around me is going to be a someone in this circumstance. I get to that articulated, that narrow point in the tram, and I see, and this guy has just started beating on this woman again. And that's the sound. I instantly understood. Once I saw it, I instantly understood what that sound was. It was the sound of his fist landing into her body and into her cheek and into her head. And I'm not making this up. This guy looked like he had just stepped out of a UFC octagon. Bald head, no offense, tattoos, ripped and jacked, and the classic kind of steroid rage kind of thing going on. And he was absolutely wailing on a woman who I would have said was in her 50s, maybe 60s, who was seated and cowering, and he's absolutely wailing on her. And the tram wasn't packed, but it was reasonably full. There weren't a lot of spare seats, and no one was moving. And in my mind, I'm looking at it going, this is wrong, and someone needs to do something. But the first someone to go in is probably dead, right? This is not pretty. This guy, now back then I was fresh out of the army. I was in good shape myself. I'm just over 6 foot, but I'm not a fighter. I'm not a trained fighter in any sense. And this guy was a good 4 inches taller than me, ripped like mad, and clearly high on something. There was something in his system. And I'm having this moment. My feet are kind of stuck on the ground. And I started walking towards them, not knowing what am I going to do in this situation. And thankfully, by providence, the grace of God, luck, call it what you will, this guy all of a sudden turns on his heel and heads for the door. And this is the bit that I've never forgotten. He calls to his 2 daughters who were there with him, who I would have said one would have been maybe 12, 13, and the other might have been 8 or 9. And they obediently follow him out of the tram, and he walks off, leaving this woman with bruises and blood and everything else. And as soon as he was off the tram, people went in to see if she was all right. But clearly that assault had been going on for a little while before I even became aware of it, because of the headphones and everything else, and no one had moved. So I stepped out of the tram to follow him, thinking, well, she's going to get looked after by the tram driver and everybody else. An assault has just happened on the tram. They're going to have processes for this. She's going to get looked after. I'm going to try and make sure the police get this guy. So I follow at a distance, because I know I'm not a match for him in a fight, right? So I follow it. And this happened to be right at the front of Crown. So those of you that know Melbourne, you know Crown Casino, on the entrance from is it Spencer Street, the old Spencer Street station, on Spencer Street. There's an area for taxis to pull in, right, where the poker rooms and so forth, at that end, in between there and Jeff's shed. And so I step out, and he starts walking really quickly, and the girls are kind of half running to keep up with him. And he jumps into a taxi, and I'm on the phone, and I get an emergency operator, and I say, listen, I've just witnessed an assault. I'm watching the perpetrator right now. He's getting into this taxi. Here's the taxi number printed on the side of the taxi. Here's the license plate of the taxi, giving them all the information I can. And they're like, and I'm like, I just literally watched this happen. I'll testify in court. I'll do whatever, right? And the operator says to me, look, once the victim has filed a report, then we'll be able to send out officers to investigate. I was like, I'm an eyewitness filing a report. Consider this a report. I'm telling you what I just saw. I'm telling you where he is and the taxi that he's in. If you call that taxi company, they'll be able to tell you where that taxi's going, and you'll be able to get this guy. I'm sorry. Once the victim has filed a report, then we'll be able to send officers to investigate. And I just thought, wow, right? The system doesn't care at all. The system just has its processes and ticks its boxes, and everyone all the way through is just covering their ass and making sure they've ticked their boxes. And whether or not justice actually gets done is secondary.
Well, you've heard the story about this domestic violence victim. She was killed by her husband, or ex-husband, and she put in a 000 call. It was 1 hour later the police came. They were diverted. 1 hour for a 000. I'm being assaulted, and she's dead. But this happened. This is typical. The system doesn't actually care. And when take for example this little girl, she was 7 or 8 years old. She was taken to the Princess Margaret, the Perth Children's Hospital, and she died there with sepsis. Now she was overlooked by a number of nurses because they were working their backsides off. The whole system was actually dysfunctional. Now that girl, that death was taken to the coroner, and the blame went round and round. We still haven't got anyone taking responsibility for that. Now it's not the nurses, the doctors, who were then reported to APRA. You failed to do this. But they were trying to manage a system which the administrators had created. They didn't get their justice served.
Yeah.
And beyond that, the minister apologized, of course, but you've lost a child's life because of a system which the bureaucrats are maintaining even now. They went on to say, yes, we're going to have we're going to have an emergency triage there. And a year later, no, we haven't done that. We said we would, but we haven't done that.
Yeah.
So do you actually care? No, you don't really, do you?
No.
Only when it gets painful enough, you begin to care.
Yeah. And painful enough means they're at risk of losing their job or some sort of consequences themselves. But as you say, they know how to run rings around the coroner. They know how to make sure the buck never stops with them.
We need to find some disagreement here.
Okay. Yes. Sorry. I promised you an argument and we're agreeing far too much. We touched on the voice. The voice is an interesting one for me. I'm reasonably resolute in my position that I won't be voting for the voice. I'll be voting no. Now, people set up the false dichotomy that either you support the voice or you want the status quo. And that, of course, is a false dichotomy. I'm not happy with the status quo, but I in my opinion, I don't think the voice is a solution for that. You've indicated that you're still not sure, perhaps inclined towards yes. Where are you at on that?
I'm inclined towards yes, but I would agree that the people who are making the yes case have done a pretty poor job.
Sure. So what is it about voting yes that you believe will lead to some positive outcomes?
Well, I think I'll tell you a story about the two nurses who came to our clinic in Newman, which is in the Pilbara in Western Australia, and said, we've come to tell you about closing the gap. This gap in the healthcare for the Indigenous people compared to the people of Western origins. And I said, what gap? And they said, oh, we've got to write one here. So they said, and they began to talk. And I said, look at that door. I said, the front door. Through that door, anyone can come. There's no discrimination whatsoever, and they all get treated the same. Explain to me which gap you're talking about.
Sure.
And they began to hesitate. And I said, are you perhaps referring to the time you sit down with the Indigenous elders with a whiteboard there? You ask their opinion. If you agree, you put it up there. If you don't, you discuss about it and don't put it up. So you're now actually giving white middle class Canberra politicians' view, and you're putting that on us as closing the gap. And they ran away because this is the truth. You're not actually dealing with closing the gap. So the voice is another attempt to give voice to the people who have not been heard. Now, I must say, I'm not really convinced that they've got the best way of doing it. I'm far more in favor of accepting the fact that we are all the same. We're not the same. We're all equal. We're not the same at all.
Yes, sorry.
We're all equal.
Yes, good clarification.
And we should be valued as humans. Yeah. And so equal wages, equal opportunities with no discrimination. I think this should be a part of it. We should respect Indigenous culture. We should appreciate the dream time. Let's look at that in a spiritual sense and see if we can get any information from it. Do we have to believe it? No. Do you have to believe there's a man in the sky who's with Jesus at the right side? You don't. Okay. Just accept that other people have got different points of view. That's what we need. But no, we're having to go down this. Why? I think because people have not really taken to heart that we are one people. We're one world.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we've got to make rules for those who are being currently oppressed that they have a voice. So yes, it's a step in the right direction. I think so. But we should move forward and say, listen, why are we making a difference? We're all equal.
So how would you respond then? People make the point that there are already, I believe the number is over 3,000 different bodies. If you literally look at every single one, state, federal, local, you working in specific regions, working statewide, nationally, etc. I believe that the number is over 3,000 different bodies that are there to help Indigenous Australians and Torres Strait Islanders. An enormous amount of money is being spent in the tens of billions of dollars every single year. I would question how well that money is being spent. I would question the outcomes that we're seeing. But I also question how the voice is going to enable any of that money to be spent any better. And given that it doesn't actually replace any of those existing bodies, it's another one in addition. I've not heard any clear explanation as to how the voice will lead to improved outcomes.
I'm going to have to agree with you there, because one of my problems I'm seeing here, and I've been to the remote and rural communities, is that the worst enemy of the indigenous people is indigenous people themselves. Certain families have got the power. They take the cash. They communicate with the government. What they say goes, and they take the cash. They drive the Mercedes, and their families are left starving.
Yeah.
So I think that's a problem we've got to deal with. But the voice would allow us, I think, to give rights to people who have less rights just now, recognizing the fact that we're not doing a good job of actually treating people equally. So I think we should do that.
Can you give me an example of where you would see that an Indigenous Australian would have less rights? Because if there is such an example, I want to know about it. I'm not aware of one.
It's not so much the law would allow people to be equal, but if you're in an Indigenous community, say remote Kimberley, and you're going to school there, you're in a situation where you have access to a teacher that is not relevant to you. So I remember seeing a boy there who was must have been 12 years old. He said, "I'm top of my class in maths." He didn't know a simple multiplication table, but he could point me across the desert to the hills there and catch goanna, kill it, and eat it.
Yeah.
That was relevant for him.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to people who are living in fairly remote communities, we're trying to make them into this school system, which was actually designed to turn people into 19th century factory workers.
You won't find me defending the school system, that's for sure.
So there we are, trying to put our current inadequate health service, education system into practice in the remote Indigenous communities, and expecting that to find resonance. We're not. So we're not treating them with the equal rights of being treated as Indigenous people. They've got to be quasi-white people and do what white people say.
Could that not be expressed differently, though, to say that we're trying to give them the best possible opportunity within what is now a Western country?
That's, I think, a very valid point. I remember speaking to an Indigenous elder. Interestingly, he was lying in hospital, a sore knee, and when you walked into his room, you knew you were walking into the presence of royalty. You didn't have to say anything. No. You just felt this is a man of substance and maybe not physical wealth, but he was a wealthy man in all kinds of wisdom.
Yeah.
And he was a child of a stolen generation. And he says to me, you know, if I hadn't been taken to another family, I'd still be standing there with a spear. So he appreciated the option of actually moving in different circles. But there are others who desperately feel the loss of the land and feel something very different. So I think the way they've been treated, and they've also got the transgenerational epigenetics, where the horrors of the past are still present in today and also tomorrow. So we need to be aware of the sensitivities there. And because we haven't been through that, we don't understand. Because we haven't lived that, the well-to-do middle-class Westerners, we don't really have a clue as to what's actually going on. We don't know why the people are living in strife, why the relationships are breaking down, why the concept of marrying according to skin to maintain the integrity of the tribe, why that is so important, is being ignored now. And what's happening is social destruction within the Indigenous community. And we're trying to apply Western values onto their society and expect the same outcomes. It's wrong.
Can I propose a different mechanism? I agree that a lot of what's happening is wrong, but can I propose a different mechanism for what's driving it? And this is based on my own time in Dumaji, goodness, the names are Wilcannia. I spent a bit of time there speaking to the elders there, and I've traveled up and down the Barker doing things to do with water. I spent some time in the Gulf country, going through different places up there, and that was eye-opening. I was 16 at the time, and that was the worst culture shock I've ever had was inside Australia, visiting Indigenous communities in the Gulf country. That is an entirely different world. I've been to PNG, I've been to various parts of the world. The worst culture shock I had was inside Australia. I was talking about this with Warren Mundine just a couple of weeks ago. He came through town and he did a talk. And obviously he has a very clear position. He's very much in support of the no side of things. So that needs to be kept into account. However, what I will say is I brought this up with him because of the conversations that I'd had with actual elders on the ground in Doomadgee, in Wilcannia, in other places. And the issue as it appears to me is that with the Mabo decision and the granting of native title over land, what we did was we told them, we're going to give you native title, but we are going to tell you how it's going to work. It's going to be done in your families, in your tribes. And if you want to do anything on your land, your tribal, sort of your Aboriginal corporation, as it is now, will have to agree as a community that that's what they want to do. And you also have to get permission from your neighbouring Aboriginal communities as well. So if they turned around and said, right, we want to build a resort here, we're going to do ecotourism in this particular part of the world where we are. Unfortunately, what happens is, number one, they have to get unity and agreement from everyone within the tribe. Then they have to get the neighboring tribes to agree. And there's an awful lot of rivalry and mistrust and so forth there. And then they have to try and get the money to be able to do something like that. And even though on paper they own that land, they can't use it the way that you and I could, where, I have the title to this land, I'm going to go and get a loan. And the bank knows that if I renege on the loan, then they can take the title of the land and they can sell it to recover the value of the loan. And so I put to Warren, did I say Anthony Mundine earlier? I meant Warren Mundine. I put to Warren, I said, what I actually was told by these elders, and I didn't seed this idea, this is the first time I'd heard it, was from these elders, that what they need is actual real private ownership of that land, not tribal collective ownership. And if you think about it in a way, and I think it was done with the best of intentions, but in a way we've kind of locked them into this socialist experiment where everything is owned collectively. So we spend taxpayers' money and we build houses, but it isn't really a case of this is your house and this is my house and that's the neighbour's house. They're all kind of collectively owned. And in that system, and I'm sure you understand this very, very well, the incentive is for people to take and to destroy and to get what you can, because if you don't get what you can right now, then someone else is going to come in next week and they're going to do it. And so we've actually, in my view, we've actually locked them into this really perverse socialist experiment, which is working about as well as every other socialist experiment has throughout history, which is to say extremely poorly. And I'm of the view that if we're going to say, if the High Court said in the Mabo decision that they could have native title, then we need to say, okay, if they're getting native title, we actually need to do it in a way that allows them to be able to say, this might be our land around here, but this particular piece, this is mine. And I have a title that says it's mine. And I can invest in this land and I can defend it as my own private property. I can get a loan to be able to build a house or to start a business or to do these various other things. I'm of the view that a lot of the problems we're seeing today is because we have basically forced them into a socialist experiment that you and I would never tolerate if it was forced upon us.
Possibly you're right on that, but I would also point out that for the indigenous people, there was no such concept as ownership of land. You belong to the land, but you didn't own the land.
Sure.
So we've got a Western construct being applied to indigenous culture, which I think is wrong.
Well,
and I think if we have with the yes vote, I think the indigenous people could tell us that. Basically, tell us to sod off because we don't know what we're talking about.
This comes back to, I guess, a libertarian philosophical position then. If the objective is for them to be able to have a say over what happens on their own land, I would support that. But I don't think that that's what the yes vote and what the voice is about. That doesn't appear to me anyway to be apparent from the Langton report from the voice, the 1-page of voice, or the 25-page of voice, or the 16-page of voice, depending on who you talk to and who you believe. I kind of don't see that. If that's what this was about actually giving them the autonomy to operate their communities as they saw fit, they'd be much more likely to win my support. But I don't see that in this design.
I have to have a closer look at that and see if I can follow your points in the actual program there. But that's not the way I understood that. But I find that fascinating. So I'll have to have a closer look at that. You might convince me about no, but I'll stay yes for just now.
Well, the point that Warren made to me was that actually, he said that I haven't researched this myself, so I might butcher this, but as best as I recall, he said that in 2019 the federal government made changes that would allow Indigenous communities to essentially have private leases on land, much the same as land in the ACT, 99-year leases. And which would then allow them to actually take a document to the bank. And they lined up a number of banks that were actually willing to start to make loans and so forth against those titles, with the understanding that if it ever had to be repossessed, it had to then be sold to someone within that community. It couldn't, it couldn't just become private property that you or I could go and buy it. It had to remain within the community. There were certain additional restrictions on it. But they made that change, and then COVID came along and the world went nuts. And then there's been a change of federal government. And one of the things that they did was immediately rescind those changes. And so we never got to see whether that experiment could have actually worked and could have actually led to any sort of positive changes in I guess the prosperity. I mean, ultimately that's what we're talking about. We're talking about their life expectancy is lower, the level of healthcare is poorer, notwithstanding the access. Yes, anyone who walks through that door, sure, that's nice. But if you live in a remote community that's 300 kilometers away from the nearest GP, let alone the nearest emergency room, your access is poor. It is my view that a private property solution would potentially be able to pull them out of that very quickly, the same way as it did with China when China moved away from the Mao Zedong, the Mao Zedong model, which was full collectivism everywhere. And I believe, and again, I'll get my dates and details wrong, I believe it was 1974 and 1976, sometime around the time when Mao Zedong, the reformer, the one who's known as the reformer.
Deng Xiaoping.
Deng Xiaoping, thank you. I got his name wrong I was chatting with someone the other day and I got his name wrong. Deng Xiaoping came in, and a friend of mine, Dr. Paul Monk, who's actually a specialist in China, he worked for the Defense Industry Organization as a China analyst, and he knows his Chinese history very well. He's the one that told me about this. There was a group of farmers that were starving. Their families were starving, as everyone was. There was a massive famine right across China at the time. And they got together privately in the dead of night and said, listen, blow this collectivism for a joke. We, without telling anyone, are going to redivide our village up back into the farms that it used to be before we got collectivized. That's your land, that's my land, that's his land. And we're going to work our own land, and we're going to do it our way, and we're not going to tell anybody. And what happened over a period of 4 years was that area became so productive, contrary to the trend everywhere else, that it came to Deng Xiaoping's attention, and he went there in person to see what's happened here. And they confessed to him what they had done. And of course, under Mao Zedong, they would have been executed. But under the new sort of leadership, he looked at that and said, this is it. And this is where Marxism or communism with Chinese characteristics was actually born. The Chinese characteristic was actually allowing private ownership. And that took a space of 4 years to come to the attention of the federal government in Beijing. They could see it was obvious. And so I wonder if we could bring about a reform like that into Indigenous communities and maintain that reform for a period of, say, 4 years. I wonder whether we could actually start to see the evidence of that gap being closed within such a short period of time. I don't know.
Oh, it's certainly worth consideration. The trouble is, we've got how many different nationalities within the Indigenous population?
500, I believe, is the last number I heard.
So, and some small, some large, and even the Noongar area here, we've got 12 different dialects, and they're all fighting one another, from a different family perspective. So finding some way of getting an agreement within that disparate group is going to be very, very difficult. Doing an experiment, say, on part of the country might be interesting. I'm reminded, it's actually about the individual desire. That same gentleman I told you about, the eminent Indigenous person, was telling me that they were sitting in Darwin watching television, and they had a border force raid on a house where there were Chinese people were living, right. 30 odd of them. And the television showed 30 odd Chinese men and women coming out of the place, hands above their head. And one Indigenous man turns to the other and says, do you know what? They're all clean. The concept that because we've got so many people in one house, that's why we're dirty.
Yeah, right. Okay, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's the personal need, and I've seen this in the Indigenous communities here. But a 4x2 house has been destroyed. You want to build a fire in in the living room, an open fire. You break the doors,
cut a hole in the roof.
and we go and fix it. Indeed, and there's always 2 broken cars out the front. So this is what we're doing. We're imposing our lifestyle on them. What we should be doing, I think, is, for example, I'll talk hemp. We should build hemp prefab walls, or laminates. You can make your own house as you think fit, suitable for your particular tribe or indigenous nature, and live according to what you think brings you in nature with harmony with nature. Rather than giving you a 4x2, we'll give you the makings here for making the combination that you need, not that I think you need.
Well, look, I would support anything that would give them a greater amount of autonomy, a greater amount of decision-making power. I do feel that there's an enormous amount of paternalism that is endemic within the way that we try and help Indigenous Australians, and it is very much a top-down system, and anything that can break that I would support. I just don't think the voice is it.
I would agree the voice is not it. In fact, that's the same gentleman says to me, if you want to help us, for the love of God, stop giving us entitlements. Because if we make it easy, we give everything there, you'll do nothing for it. You have to actually be able to work for it. This is the old conservative work ethos. You know, if it's worth it, work for it.
And once again,
we've still got to find the disagreements.
I was going to say, once again, we've tried to find a fight and failed. I don't know. You start one. I've started 2 now, and we've not managed to come to blows. I don't know.
I talk about women's rights, for example.
All right, go for it. Let's get started. Let's have 2 white men talking about women's rights. The trolls are going to love it.
Well, I think non-uterine discussion is quite useful.
Okay. Well, I mean, these days we could just both identify as women, and then we'd have every right to talk about it.
Oh, the bathroom thing. Yeah, right. I have to tell you, I have got a niece who used to be a nephew, and I do recall the pain that she now went through in that transition. Not fully transition, as far as I know. It's none of my business. I'm not going to ask.
Sure.
But I do recall one time. This is a family marriage, and my brother, the father of this nephew niece of mine, said, "Oh, she's not going to go because she thinks people will be, bullying her or oppressing her or laughing at her." So I had a chat, and I said, "Listen, come on, get a good dress together. We're all going to be there. Come and join us. It's going to be fun." So I spent some hours encouraging her, and she went down, dressed. I must say, a pretty ugly woman, but still went there as a woman, and had a wonderful time, and found herself accepted by all. And my brother comes up and he says, "Oh, he's so happy because, of course, the love is there. Of course, it's there. You're the father, and to find that his brother had helped his offspring find peace and just genuine fun time
just have a
was
good
so
time.
important for him." This is what we need to do for everyone's choices. I don't care if you're how you're born, male or female. If you want to dress up like Boy George, or if you want to be like one of the Matildas, go for it. It's entirely your business, not mine at all. What I would have a problem with is you telling me what I should do or shouldn't do.
Yeah, and this is where I have an issue with it as well. I mean, from my perspective, as a Christian, I sit here and go, what we're seeing here is people rejecting how God designed them to be. This is my perspective on it, and I would happily work with anyone to help them to come to terms with how they were born. However, if they choose to reject how they were born and they choose to have surgeries and to identify as something different, live as something different, that doesn't, in my view, make them justify any sort of a hatred, any sort of a ostracization, any sort of a excluding them from society or from my own life. I think those decisions, and we're seeing this begin to be talked about a lot more. For a long time, transition regret was just not spoken of. You weren't allowed to acknowledge that it existed. And I'll acknowledge there are many people who transition and don't feel that regret, but there are certainly a significant proportion of people that do. And I think there are a lot of issues being thrown up now as the age at which people are transitioning is getting younger. Someone made the point of when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pirate, but I'm glad no one, cut off my leg and ripped out my eye and gave me an eye patch. There are some issues there as it gets to people that are younger. But to put it bluntly, we have the right to reject God's design for our lives. God has actually given us the right to do that. And some people express that in different ways. That shouldn't be a source then, in my view, of treating those people poorly. But at the same time, I think it should still be socially acceptable to say, look, I think you're living in an attempt to reject biological reality and God's design and the way that you were created to be. And I would much rather see someone come to terms with how they were created than try and usually with a lot of side effects, reject that and become something that they weren't born to be.
Ooh.
Very dangerous territory we're on.
Very dangerous territory indeed. Look, there's about, what, 72 different genders, is there? I've never worked that one out.
I think it changes every other week. It's a little bit like the number of eggs that you're allowed to eat according to dietitians. It changes every other week.
Okay. Look, we can say that the XXXY is the standard, except there's not. There's XXX, there's chromosomal abnormalities, there's hermaphrodites being born. So we don't just have the two main sexes, we've got a few variants of that. Then we've got that's the physical side. Then we've got the mental side. How do I feel? I don't know about you. I was in a boarding school, and it's strange because you feel attraction to certain people and you don't feel attraction to other people, whether it's male or female. It doesn't really make a difference. That's what we had in an old boys' school. Certain attractions were there, certain people were repelled. This is life. Okay. Could you then say that's a homosexual appeal? There's not. No. It's simply that we are attracted to people, and otherwise we're not. Now, of course, normally, the way of things are normally, the male will be attracted to female and the other way around. But is that the only expression? I think to ignore the beauty of a wide variety of expression means that we prefer to have a painting in only two colors. You get pretty colors, pretty paintings, but it's not the full expression we've got there. And appreciating everybody's choices and appreciating that we're all part of a tapestry, and it's a beautiful tapestry, is something to be appreciated. What I cannot abide is this fundamentalist, mainly, well, okay, Muslim and Christian approaches. If you're homosexual, I'm going to throw you off the top of a building. Yeah. Okay. If you're my boy is gay, I'm going to reject you as throw you out of the house because you're no longer conforming to my view of what God says. Well, I've got a problem with that.
Yeah, I never saw Jesus instructing that anyone be thrown off the top of a building, but maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm reading the wrong Bible. I missed that particular chapter and verse. You mentioned feelings there, and this is one of the things that does concern me a little bit, is the elevation of feelings in our culture now, where we say, oh, because you feel that way, then we'll change reality as much as is medically possible to try and conform with your feelings. But we know that feelings can be very fickle, they can change. And I'm also quite amused by this concept of, you were born as a man. Let's remove the chromosomal edge cases, because they are a very small minority of cases. Let's say you're born as a man, and then you feel like you're a woman. I would argue it's not possible for you to know what that feels like. You feel like you're not comfortable in your own body. But I would say that if you're born as a man, it's not actually possible to say, well, I feel like a woman. That's not actually an experience that you can know.
I would tend to agree with you, because male and female thinking is fundamentally different. Of course, there's a spectrum, of course, but how a woman communicates with herself and with others is very different to the way a man communicates. For example, we think very much more in causative terms. I hear a rattle in the car, I wonder where it's coming from. I must stop and check this next time I'm out there. Okay, there's a problem with that. But a woman is going to have a very different way of thinking. They go through a whole series of stories, all of them true. Okay, and a conversation which may actually, to express it, may take several minutes, but happens in a second. And at the end of that is a conclusion, which you and I will have difficulty finding. Okay, but that's a logical consequence of a whole series of thoughts, which have got no relation to the reality. So you may get someone thinking, okay, you've been thinking about the rattle in your car, and your partner is thinking, I've just mentioned that I need how my dress is. He's ignored that. Obviously, he's thinking about someone else. There must be another girlfriend there. I knew that when he was away the other day there, because he didn't answer his phone. And therefore, you jump to the immediate conclusion, you're cheating on me, you're going to leave me, I hate you. And you're sitting there thinking there's a rattle in the car. Whoa, you hate me? What happened there?
So, I shared a meme along that lines.
You know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I shared a meme along those lines a little while ago. When I say a little while, it was probably 15 years ago. No, it can't be quite that long. Facebook hasn't been around that long. Probably 12 or so years ago, and got into a lot of trouble with a feminist friend of mine. It was a couple lying in bed, and the girl's there with this long train of thought about why her husband or her partner has gone silent on her, and he's lying there going, motorbike won't start, can't figure out why, and that's his entire train of thought, right? So yes, this is something that's been recognized for a long time. But one of the things that I find fascinating about the transgender movement, looking at the likes of Dylan Mulvaney and others, is how they use what would be considered deeply offensive stereotypes in order to express their change in gender. So someone like a Dylan Mulvaney, the first day that she came out and said, I'm a woman now, was posting TikToks and Instagram videos saying, oh, this morning I had a little cry and then I went shopping to make myself feel better, right? And playing to some of the, what any feminist would consider to be some of the most offensive stereotypes of what womanhood is. Then you get Neil deGrasse Tyson coming out much more recently and saying, oh, well, gender is fluid. You might feel different every single day. And, one day you might feel like a woman, you want to go shopping. And the next day you might feel like a man, you put on a muscle suit. And so they're playing to these exact stereotypes that have been rejected and argued against for so long by feminists. But now they've almost become a point of pride for those who are now trying to argue that you can change gender.
Yes, I identify as a woman. I'm going to walk into the women's toilet now. My beard, bald head, but I feel feminine. Nonsense. There's a whole host of things you can talk about there. But what I said about the male and female thinking, if I'm born a man and I have a male mental pattern, I might feel there's some certain feminine attributes about me. And I've still got a male thinking pattern.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I then say I'm a woman. I think, well, actually, you may dress like one. You may make a very convincing case you're a woman after transitional surgery. You may make a stunning woman, and in fact, there are such. We try to go to Thailand, for example, see with your own eyes. But have you changed the way you think? Have you changed the way you communicate? Probably not. Now, there is, of course, there's this gender fluid approach here. The more gentle approach, the more communicative approach. You could call it a bit gay, a bit soft. And you can also look at the other side there, women who have more of a male pattern. Absolutely, you do get that. But that is, I think, I don't think that's a major issue. It's against personality. So I wouldn't play too much on that. So there's the whole gender. My point of view is let people be people. If you want to sleep with someone of your same sex, go for it. If they want to dress up as someone else but still be the same sex, go for it. I mean, it's however you get your fun. Go for it.
Well, throughout history,
don't make it compulsory for me.
You mentioned hermaphrodites earlier, and throughout history, we've had at different times, whether it's castratos for various, whether religious or king's courts would have castratos for various reasons. We had hermaphrodites. We kind of had categories for these people. What we didn't do is say you used to be a man and now you can be a woman. What we said was this person is actually something else in between. It is in a sense this multiple genders kind of idea that has been expressed throughout history previously with hermaphrodites and other sort of categories. But I don't believe I've seen in history until very recently this idea that you can go from being one to being the other. Are you aware of any examples of that?
No, I'm not. I'm a great fan of the Monty Python film, The Life of Brian, that famous scene.
You can't be a woman.
Henceforth, you can't give birth. You haven't got a uterus. Don't you oppress me.
Yeah.
So,
but we can fight for his right to have children, even though he can't.
Absolutely, yes, word for word. So this stupidity here, but again, it's all about judgmentalism. It's about me. If I want to appear as a woman, difficult in my case, but if I wanted to appear as a woman, why wouldn't I? I wouldn't make a very pretty one, but go for it. If I feel better like that, go for it. But the problem is that other people can say, "Oh, you're dressing like a woman. You're weird. I'm going to beat you up." There we have a problem.
Yeah, well,
it's the right of people to express themselves.
So I would also layer on top of that, though, the freedom of association. So if someone looks at me and says, you're a libertarian, you're a political commentator, I think you're this and that, I think you're a racist, I think you're a misogynist, I think you're a whatever, and I don't want to have anything to do with you, I think that's entirely within their rights. I think they're wrong in that categorization of me. I use those examples because those are things people say about me. I think they're wrong in those categorizations, but I would absolutely defend their right to choose who they associate with. I would extend that to people. I personally don't. But if someone said, I'm not comfortable, I don't like the fact that you were born as a man and you present yourself as a woman, and I'm going to choose to no longer associate with you, I don't think that's the right approach, but I would defend their right to take that approach. The moment it becomes beating somebody up, I think, well, that's a clear violation of that person's rights. Male, female, male, dressed like a female, whatever, doesn't matter. You don't beat people up. But the right to choose who you associate with, I would still defend, even under those, even in an example of something like this, which would then be a violation of certain anti-discrimination laws and all sorts of things.
Well, I think what you and I are demonstrating this evening is the way life should be, because your point of view is actually quite different to my point of view.
Okay.
But in our discussions, we've actually found a lot of common ground where we can appreciate those differences. We're not going to agree, but we can agree to disagree, and we can like each other.
And we can understand each other's point of view.
Indeed so. And this requires a bit of empathy, a bit of just listening and agreeing to agree that I may not be right all the time, although I am. And just sharing, just enjoying the beauty of difference. But look at, say, what's happening in America, where they're polarized and they refuse to love each other, to come into that sphere. I have a fear of that happening in this country as well. It's happening in Germany with the Alternative für Deutschland, this right-wing move towards actually real Nazis. And that's a wrong word to use, I suppose. But you know, that type of approach, where we need to actually get more people, A, putting a point of view out there, B, doing it respectfully, but C, most importantly, listening to what the other person is saying.
On the polarization, I tend to agree. We follow America with a lag anywhere from 10 to 20 years. And we saw with particularly the Black Lives Matter protests really kicked off a new level of polarization in American politics. And that is coming here without question. But I think a lot of the polarization actually comes back to the fact that we're fighting over the government having the power to tell us all what we have to think. If you invest in the government so much power that they get to make legislation that now applies to everybody, well, now I have to fight you tooth and nail over who gets control over the government, who gets to tell who what they have to believe. And if we divested that power out of government, where they didn't have the right to tell us what everyone has to believe, and you could go on your merry way believing what you believe, and I could go on my merry way believing what I believe, and there wouldn't be a problem unless someone beat somebody else up. At that point, I think a lot of the angst, a lot of the high stakes, a lot of the polarization would actually be diffused because the stakes become so much lower. You can still do what you want. I can still do what I believe is right. And as long as we're not violating each other's rights, we can get along. I think it's this power struggle that makes it so polarizing.
Well, I remember Australia in the 1960s, and it was a free country. It's a nanny state now. I think I would like the right to be able to make a mistake, provided no one else gets hurt. For example, motorcycle helmets. Okay, not to wear a helmet while riding a motorcycle is a stupid thing. It's going to result in major damage. If that's what you want to do, you should do it. Okay, I'm not sure I want my country to pay for the long-term rehabilitation costs of you doing. Now, this is the difference.
Put a pin in that one. No, that's a great topic. We'll get to that. And once you finish your point, I'd love to go there.
The point I think is made really is that that there's a move now. We want to have our rights. It's my right to do this. But the other side of that same coin, that one coin, is responsibilities. I need to carry the responsibilities for exercising my rights.
Yes.
If I'm not prepared to do that, I don't deserve the rights.
Yeah. 100%. Now, what I've observed, and I've never tried to express this publicly before, so I might balls this up, but let me do my best. Everyone listening is going to judge me, but I know that you're going to give me an honest hearing and push back where you see the need to, but at least see what I'm trying to say. It is our socialized healthcare system that has provided the justification for so much of the nanny state. It is our effort to be compassionate. Oh no, everyone should be able to have healthcare. It shouldn't be dependent on how much money you have or what your income is. We want universal healthcare. Oh, now that we're all paying each other's health expenses, we're going to have to control absolutely every aspect of your life because it's not fair for you to not wear a motorbike helmet and become a burden on society. And in a very real way, I believe that our compassionate socialist health system in particular, but social welfare net and all that sort of stuff, has actually led to us becoming an incredibly intolerant society and a very non-compassionate society because we're controlling what everyone does, because otherwise you're going to cost us.
Yes, so the financial question here. Look, I quite agree with that. There's, when it comes to the healthcare system, Mark Butler himself, the federal health minister, said, and I'm not sure why this hasn't achieved a high mention in the press, the health service just now, the sickness service as I call it, is actually failing, and there's no amount of money can fix it. The only thing that can happen is that the system can crumble and the green shoots come up of the new health service. They can't. If I was health minister, I couldn't fix this problem, although I know pretty well what's going on, because the system itself doesn't allow it. The status quo is so firmly entrenched that fixing it is not possible.
Yeah, wow.
So we're going to go through a lot of trouble to fix this. Now, you could then say, listen, if you haven't got the money for giving your child antibiotic and your child dies, that is unjust because the antibiotic is there. It's just a matter of the cash. A caring society would do that. That's the Christian point of view as well. But then comes the corollary that because I have antibiotics freely available, therefore I'm not going to look after my health, and therefore I'm not going to maintain my hygiene, and I'll use the antibiotic, with the result that, first of all, there are lots of antibiotics, lots of costs, but also there are lots of drug-resistant antibacterials, and we've still got problems with the infection that we try to avoid in the first place. In fact, more illnesses are coming up. You could even make the argument, now this is going to be controversial.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're tuning in. Member of Parliament is about to say...
Well, don't spread this word far and wide, but it's a question. It's a philosophical
I won't tell
question.
anyone.
My parents grew up without any antibiotics. Infant mortality was quite high. Second World War happened, antibiotics came into being. We've now got the first generation, who had access to better healthcare, myself included. I had my appendix taken out, I had antibiotics. Okay, I should have died. I have given birth, or I haven't. I have fathered children who wouldn't have been in existence if my life had ended. Are they as secure in their survivability as my parents and their grandparents who were survived? So now we've got 2, 3, 4 generations of people born to parents who weren't fit for the survival. Is there any reason why we've got this increase in diseases, this increase in new illnesses? Could we then be saying, and our population is now 8 billion people on this planet, could we be saying that we're paying the price for having treated people? And that we've now got generations of people who are genetically unfit?
You're not wrong when you said it was going to be controversial. That's wow, interesting. I've not heard that perspective before. That's an interesting one. I mean, my instinct, of course, is to rebel against such a concept and to say, well, no. However, there is a reality, and I have wondered about this in the past. One of the first systems in the human body to fail, one of the most fragile, is the reproductive system. And I have wondered, and I mean no offense to anyone individually, but again, let me reciprocate controversial opinion for controversial opinion. We have now IVF. We have now various ways to assist people to be able to have children that are having difficulty naturally. But what if there's a reason why that particular person's reproductive system has had more difficulty than what others have had? What if that was, and in my view, I do believe that there's a big man in the sky. What if that was designed as a first point of failure, so that there was a reduced likelihood of passing on congenital defects or other issues that someone may have had? I mean, we're now deeply into controversial territory here. Pretty soon the trolls will be jumping in, calling us Nazis, wanting to talk about eugenics. We're not talking about eugenics. We're talking about genetics. It's an entirely different thing. That's an interesting thought. I'm going to have to mull that one for a while.
It's puzzled me for some considerable time, because I've looked at the change in pattern of disease and my clinical work over the last 40 years. It's changed, and I can't find out any reason why it's changed. I thought when I first qualified, there's nothing to learn. We know all of medicine, all our research, and with such a lot more we've discovered, but we know nothing. So what is going on? I do fear that we have caused a lot of our inherent problems. It goes on to things like, we mentioned food processing. You wanted to speak about that.
I want to get back to that
point.
Yeah.
One apple, which may be 6 months old, looking fresh on the shelves, has been plucked pre-ripe, so it hasn't actually got the natural ingredients, the glyconutrients, to allow this apple to be healthy. But it's also had exposure to 1,600 chemicals from the time of being a seed. Are we cool with that? If you look at the issues with gut health, the gut is like a second brain. And if we're actually poisoning ourselves with sugar all the time, if we're putting chemicals into our food, which is causing our microbiome to have problems, are we creating illnesses for ourselves in the future? Should we be changing the whole structure of our society? Not just the glyphosate, but also every chemical being used, the style of agriculture, because all of that you could then probably predict is contributing to chronic illness in our society.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so there are two big issues I want to unpack here. And I think I'm going to have to abandon one of them in order to get to the one that's more sort of more relevant to me right now. The one that I'm going to touch on and then abandon is pushing back a little bit and proposing a few alternate possible reasons. And I don't know what I'm talking about, but just off the top of my head, you've noticed a difference in the kinds of presentations, the kinds of diseases, the ratios, et cetera, that you're observing over your career. That's a valuable data point to have. You no doubt see a lot of patients. You might only be one doctor. Yes, it's anecdotal, but you see a lot of patients. So there's this decent sized data set there. Could it be caused by simply just the outright increase in population, that you're now noticing you're seeing more people and you're noticing a greater instance?
Oh, yes, that's certainly true. But if we go back to the statistics, it's not the number, it's the percentage.
Right. Okay, good. Is it partly because we're living longer, and so we're living to see new diseases and different expressions of diseases that previously we would have died of something else before we got there? Or are you noticing it in younger people?
Well, certainly the point you make is true. The longer you live, the more shit's going to happen. But I'm seeing, for example, bowel cancer. I was shocked. My youngest patient to die of bowel cancer was 28 years old.
Oh, wow.
Previously being 40, 50, 60. Yeah, I know.
Wow, yeah. Okay. All right. Let me get to the one that I wanted to get back to from earlier on, which is this issue with the foods that we eat. I've had some gut issues ever since I got one of the world's most epic food poisoning episodes in Colombia in 2015. I got food poisoning in Colombia, and then the next day I was on a plane to Venezuela right when they're at the absolute worst of their, well, actually not the worst, it's gotten worse since, but they were at the worst up to that point in time of their shortages caused by socialism. So just a pro tip for those who like traveling: do not go to a country that has a toilet paper shortage with severe gastro. That is a recipe for a bad time. So we were a week in Venezuela. I had the most hellish gastro. It lasted for over a week. I couldn't go and get any sort of medical help. They don't have a medical system. You talk about the medical system having to collapse. I mean, their medical system is gone. They're reusing scalpels. They're reusing needles. They're washing bandages and reusing them. So my gut never fully recovered. And then, years passed. COVID hit. I started drinking a lot of alcohol for reasons that people who've watched Battleground Melbourne or read the book that I'm writing at the moment will understand more around that. Now I've moderated that and I'm continuing to moderate that, but obviously that's not good for your gut either. And I put on a reasonable amount of weight since I got married, just that classic, get married, pull the ripcord, and just stack on a bunch of weight. So all of those things, a bad gut, gaining weight, drinking far more than I should. So earlier this year, I went, right, okay, I need to change direction here. And I changed my diet. And I haven't gone full carnivore, which is kind of the fashionable diet at the moment. But what I have done is significantly reduced my carbs, not eliminated, but significantly reduced. I no longer have carbs for breakfast. I have eggs for breakfast and proteins for breakfast. I have a very small lunch. I mean, today, for example, was just quite a thick cut slice of cheese. Sometimes I might have a banana, or I might have a nut bar, or a couple of fingerfuls of almonds or something like that. That'll be my lunch, and that'll get me through to dinner. And dinner tonight was literally just steak and some cheese on bickies. Now that's unusual. Normally I'd have some veggies at dinner, but tonight it just so happens we just had some steak and some cheese on bickies and so forth. I'm finding, number one, I'm losing weight without really having to think about it. It's just kind of happening, not massively quickly. It's not just falling off me, but I've definitely changed direction. I've got more energy. I'm waking up in the morning feeling more energized. And I'm not getting cravings for snacks and sugar and these sorts of things really almost at all. I mean, my kids had ice cream after dinner tonight, and I just said, no, thanks. I just don't want any. I don't feel the need for any. How much of that do you think that what I'm perceiving as the benefits, how much of that is just the loss of weight? How much of that is actually because maybe this diet that I've got now is actually just better than the carb heavy, also veggie heavy? I was eating a very veggie heavy diet, but also a very carb heavy diet previously. And do you put any stock at all into this carnivore diet concept?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have different physiologies and different types of foods are more suited to us. If you've grown up, for example, in the Inuit community over thousands of years, you will be adapted to a certain carnivore approach. If you've grown up in Italy over 2,000 years, you will have a Mediterranean diet, which suits you quite nicely. But what we can certainly say is that our carbohydrate intake has dramatically increased since the 50s, and that the quality of our food has decreased. They do studies, for example, on the actual micronutrient content has decreased. Our soil has been depleted, so that the fruit and veg that we're getting just now doesn't have the same value as, say, 100 years ago. Now, the carbohydrates in particular, we have, look, it started with, I think, the Americans back in the 60s when they decided that the grain farmers needed help. And so they increased the grain output, made it high glucose corn syrup, and use that to sweeten everything. You try eating an American breakfast now, and you find it's quite sweet.
Yeah, it's horrific.
And they've exported that as well. And that's coupled with the false data from Ansel Keys, who did the study which showed that increase in cholesterol will cause heart disease. The whole thing was a lie. The data was cherry picked. It was completely false. But the statin industry went into full drive, where we've had cholesterol was taken out of our food, but it was replaced with carbohydrates, cornstarch, or corn syrup, to make it taste better. You look at a picture of the 1970s beach, 1920s beach, to the 2020s beach, you find fat people now. It wasn't the case when I was a boy. And it's not being judgmental, it's simply a result of
an observation.
Carbohydrates in your diet.
Yeah.
And that carbohydrate diet in the gut will result in gases being produced. It'll result in sensitivities being created. Leaky gut syndrome will happen. The immune system will take a tumble, and that's the beginning of your problems.
Well, I've got to say, I'd never really thought too much about it. I was raised to believe the food pyramid and to take all of that stuff as gospel truth. And of course, now we know if we just ate like they did in the 1950s, we'd be a lot better off than what we are right now. Now, with that in mind, obviously better nutrients in the soils and various other aspects as well that have changed. From your perspective, I hear people saying that the gut is one of the single biggest sources of health issues in modern society. Do you think that's overstating it to say it's one of the biggest?
No, I quite agree with that. The gut, if you flatten it out to as large as extent, occupies the size of a tennis court.
Wow.
Every part of that is intensely active biochemically, immunologically. There's hormones being produced there which have a direct effect on your brain. So the microbiome, the gut bacteria, which we thought was just where poo is made.
Yeah.
If you take the healthy microbiome from a thin person, put it into someone who's overweight, they lose weight effortlessly. If someone depressed, you take a microbiome from someone who's not depressed, their moods improve. So the microbiome has an immense effect on our health. The gut function itself is immensely important. And but we've been treating our guts as a deeply unsexy place where poo is made, and we've been neglecting it. Gastroenterologists don't really pay much attention to the actual functional lower layer of gut function. I look for cancer, look for ulcers, I look for blockages, but the actual function, less important.
Well, I believe it was 2013. I was asked by a friend to go to a particular university in Melbourne and film a lecture by a gastroenterologist, and he spent about 2 hours. It was a lecture for doctors, so a whole bunch of GPs showed up, probably 40 people in the room or so, seated there, and he stood up the front with a incredibly boring PowerPoint presentation. And talked for 2 hours and then took questions for another hour and a half after that. Such was the level of interest from the GPs in what he had to say. And this was really the first time I'd ever heard anyone talk about the importance of gut biology. And to be honest, I should have taken it seriously back then. I didn't. And now I'm much more interested, having experienced what I've experienced since. But he talked about the energy production cycle, and I'm going to get it wrong. It was something like the TCL cycle, or there's some sort of an acronym around how foods get broken down and which bacteria produce what byproducts and then what happens with them and how they influence the body. And the fundamental message from him was, if your gut bacteria is wrong, you're going to have brain fog. You're going to have a total lack of energy. You're going to not want to get out of bed in the morning. You could end up with depression. And where he got really controversial, and I can't say one way or the other, but what he was claiming was that actually for some people on the autism spectrum, depending on the cause, fixing their gut bacteria would either improve or actually in some cases completely remove them from the autism spectrum. He believed that autism was actually an extreme level of symptoms from gut dysfunction. I can't comment on that one way or the other. Have you seen any evidence before or since that might be able to comment on that?
Not on the autism side, although it's very interesting, but undoubtedly the gut, if you transform what you put into your gut, the output is very different. Sex steroid hormones, for example, thyroid, brain function, by all means. But the gut, one of the primary causes for eczema rashes is actually gut health. Yeah, so this is actually really controversial back in the 80s. Professor Stemmann in Gelsenkirchen was doing this with very odd methods, but he was having success, but very, very strict and very unpleasant, very abusive, in fact. But if you change the gut function, the eczema will vanish.
Interesting. Interesting. I mean, the skin is, I believe, the largest organ of the body. I don't think I'm misspeaking to say that in terms of, just the area that it occupies. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed
the nutrition. I think the nutrition is one of the fundamentals of what we need to go in the future for wellness, because if we don't fix this, we're going to go deeper and deeper into ill health. And so bang for buck, fix the nutrition.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat. We're 2 hours and 10 minutes in, and I don't want to overstay my welcome. It's my first slow chat back. Let's not try and set a new record. But are there any topics that you had in mind, anything that you wanted to discuss that we haven't touched on yet?
Me, I would like to get into a ding-dong battle with you.
We've tried. You're just too nice. You're too nice.
Well, no, I don't. I think what we're pointing out here is the fact that we can have opposite point or different points of view. It doesn't have to be a battle. Although I would have liked really to take you to the edge. Maybe the next time. But yeah.
Well, look,
the abortion. We didn't go far enough with abortion.
Look, we probably didn't. I could have really tried to drill down, but essentially, I mean, look, let's touch on it again. Let's as a closing gift to those that are still watching now. Let's touch on it again. For me, it appears to me to come down to this. It's a question of, when do you believe that fetus, unborn child, whatever, becomes human? Right? I mean, I would argue if something is not human or it is not alive, so it can be human but dead, or it can be alive but not human, killing it, no problem. Once it is both human and alive, killing it becomes a human rights violation. Right? For me, that's a fairly simple sort of equation. If it's not human or it's not alive, you can remove it. That's fine. But if it is both human and alive, you can't. So for me, that becomes the question: when is it human and when is it alive?
Well, I would argue that even an unrecognizable embryo of a human is a human, just in a very primitive state.
Right.
So I think I'd wash that one out. That argument doesn't play. It's you're looking at the appearance and saying, it looks human, but that's a judgment. I think the whole thing is human all the way through. It's more emotive if you see a human type for being there that you're now aborting. It's very painful because that's a human life. It's all human. But I think if you then took that fetus out of the womb and left it there, even if you give all the support, it would die. Now, the earliest I think I've seen is 26 weeks. Probably you can get 25 weeks. But such children who are very, very preterm are also very likely to have chronic, ongoing health issues, quite serious issues. They may be alive, but are they living as well as they might have? So by saving a dearly loved or wanted child, you might actually be causing problems for that child down the road that it would rather not have had. So on the other hand, I've seen results of people who are greatly handicapped are leading a life that anyone would say, this is fantastic. So it's judgmental.
So I would actually...
A 24-week-old...
Sorry, I was going to say, I would actually agree with you on that question of life. I mean, I'm sorry, on the question of when is it human? It's human from the very beginning. I actually agree with that particular point. And it's one of the reasons why I can't draw a line as to where it is acceptable to terminate. It's not acceptable to terminate after they're born. I think everyone pretty much agrees with that. It's not acceptable to terminate in the third trimester. Most people would agree with that. It's not acceptable to terminate. I can't find that line where you go from, no, this is murder, to, oh, no, this is fine. I can't find that line anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I think 9 weeks, no one will have a problem with that. 15 weeks, people will be thinking about that because that's a different type of embryo. The viability is up to 24 weeks. You're not going to have viability after birth. We've chosen 23 weeks here as against the Eastern states because that is just giving 1 week more leeway where we're not going to make a mistake, because maybe it's 25 weeks and we thought it was 24. You know what I mean? So there's that. But 23 weeks for us is the limit. If you give birth to that child, it would be alive for some breaths, but it wouldn't be able to exist further because it hasn't got the ability.
Okay, but let me push back on that. Just because it doesn't have the ability to survive outside of its mother's womb yet doesn't invalidate its humanity and doesn't invalidate the fact that it is a life. So again, I don't see why that question of viability outside of the womb, I don't see why that's a deciding factor in whether it's acceptable to abort or whether it's not.
Well, the question there, I think, is more the principle of abortion in principle should be banned altogether, which is one side I completely disagree with. On the other side is that any life can be aborted at any stage, even after birth, if it's inconvenient for us. I would reject that as well. The question really is what is the best for the mother, I think, because there are so many areas where if the mother were forced to give birth, her life might be at risk. This is late-term abortions, by the way. Life may be a risk, or the child, when born, would be such a detriment to normal life that it'd be better to abort that child. Like, for example, major organ damage or major brain damage. So 23 weeks for me is the area where I'm saying, yeah, okay, fine, that is sensible. 25 weeks, if we discover that, well, we've made a mistake. We shouldn't have let that carry on. But if it's going to be something which is majorly terminal, like, for example, absent kidneys, then I would suggest that the best thing would be to actually let that child pass. You can actually give the fetal injection to kill the fetus in the womb, and it's passed normally, or it can be passed normally and allowed to die in the mother's arms. But that would be the kinder thing to do than to actually give birth, to give a full-term pregnancy, and then to have the child die a day or a week afterwards.
All right, so let me push back a little bit on some of those I guess the inbuilt assumptions here. One of the things that I notice often when it comes to debating abortion and abortion rights and when is it right and when is it wrong, is the use of these examples that involve a child that's not going to survive anyway. Instances where a child might have been conceived through rape or various cases like that. But invariably, when I push back and say, okay, so if I were to concede that rape is okay and medical non-viability is okay, would you agree that if it's medically viable, it's not okay? And if it's not a product of rape, it's not okay? And invariably, the answer, of course, is no. So they're using these edge cases to make an argument, but then they're applying that argument to all sorts of situations that aren't those edge cases.
Well, let's take a rape case, for example, and someone has been raped and they've reported that to the police, which isn't always the case. In fact, it's not often the case. You've now got, they've now gone past the period and they've missed it, the oh dear, and a week's gone by and 2 weeks have gone by. So now they're 6, maybe 7 weeks pregnant, okay, in the parlance. So then they make a decision. I've been raped. I need to get rid of this baby because I don't want to carry my rapist's baby. Okay. And that would be, I think, a perfectly acceptable thing to do. Having been raped by someone and then waiting until it's 27 weeks pregnant and you said, well, I'm not going to have this baby, I would have a major problem with that. I'd wonder what stopped you in that time from looking after yourself and removing this pregnancy before it became a 27-week-old, very viable baby.
Right. But this is kind of my point. Again, we're talking about an instance of rape, which is a horrible and traumatic circumstance. And I would argue that we have a social responsibility, especially as a Christian, but I think we have a social responsibility to support anyone who finds themselves in that situation and pull out all the stops and do everything that we can to support someone who finds himself in that situation. But the vast majority of abortions, as I understand the statistics, tend to be elective. They're not in instances of rape. They're the exception rather than the norm. And they're often not in the instances of any kind of certainty of medical non-viability. I'll give you an example. A friend of ours, they had the ultrasounds and the doctor told them that their daughter had a club foot. and urged them to abort the baby on the basis that the baby had a clubbed foot. The mother chose not to have the abortion. Her husband left her because of that, because he said, I don't want to be the father of a disabled child. Her daughter was born, full term, was born, and had absolutely no issues whatsoever with her foot. It was just a weird position or something where the person doing the ultrasound got it wrong. So in these cases where there isn't life-threatening medical issues with the baby itself, and there isn't something like rape to take into consideration, taking out all of those edge cases, I find it very difficult to get someone who supports abortion to actually defend it on that basis. In those circumstances, they use the abortion example, they use the medical non-viability example to try and make a case, and then they apply that case to a whole bunch of circumstances where the mother just doesn't feel like they want the baby. It's not the right time of life. I want to finish my university degree. My boyfriend is pressuring me. My dad is pressuring me. Whatever the reasons may be, they're not medical and they're not legal in that sense of a rape or a crime having been committed.
Yeah, most of the abortions I have actually assisted with in recommending on have been social. And it's I think very important to recognize that giving birth to a child that you don't want is a huge demand. It utterly changes your life, and not often for the better if you don't want this child. Oh, there are examples otherwise, but this is what has to happen. So having an abortion when it's not right for that person is absolutely something that is purely for social grounds, but is very, very justifiable in that the harm caused to the mother is going to be troublesome. And so I would say, for example, a woman comes into me and says, I've missed my period. I'll say, oh, okay. Now, was that planned or unplanned? And they can say, well, it's unplanned. Now, most pregnancies which come to term are actually unplanned because it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
All of my children are unplanned. But it's still wanted. The trouble is, if you say it was unplanned and I don't know what to do, okay, or I know what I want to do, I want a termination. I don't want to know what to do. Let's have a chat about that and let's see what counselling we can see what services are available for you because you're not aware of them. Let's see, have a think about this. Let's wait a bit, take your time. Don't rush into this because if you do and you regret it, you'll always regret it. Okay, this is standard medical practice. It's nothing new. It's not in legislation. It's what doctors do. Or they say it's I've made my decision. I don't want this child. It's not right for me just now for a variety of reasons. Each one of those reasons is going to be good. Okay, you may not agree with it, but for the mother, it's good, and it's her right to choose. And I would say yes, let's go for that. So it's not the choice I would like to make, but it's one if she wants to make, do that.
So what's absent in that line of reasoning, though, is any attribution of rights to the child themselves. And this is why I kind of come back to this idea of when is that child a human and when is that child alive? When do they have human rights? At what point does the child actually have a say, even though they don't have a voice? At what point does that consideration come in for you?
Well, that's a difficult one, but I'd say probably at birth.
Okay.
Because before birth, all kinds of things can happen. There can be stillbirth. Okay, it can be a mother has a major health problem and will die if this pregnancy carries on. That kind of thing. But so at the time of birth, that is the moment when I think this is now a person that's born, it's registered as one of us. But you could go back to the ancient Jewish times. 40 days afterwards, that's when the soul comes in. In some traditions of Judaism, that then it's human. Before that is not. Okay, and then the question is whereabouts in that scale do you want to put that line?
So the interesting thing is, from a legal point of view, if, for example, a pregnant mother, is killed in a car crash, and they're known to be pregnant, then I don't believe there is a lower boundary on that. Now, obviously, below a certain point, we wouldn't know, and the mother wouldn't know. But if it's known that mother is pregnant, then that's counted as a double fatality and not just as a single fatality. So there is kind of precedent in Australian law. Maybe different states are different, but there is precedent within Australia to recognise an unborn child down to the lowest possible age at which we even are aware of their existence as a living human being, and their death in something like a car crash or a house fire or something is recognised as the death of a person. And then we have the situation where someone can walk in and get a termination, and that's not counted as a death. And I find that a very strange kind of contradiction that currently exists within Australian law.
Oh, I do agree. So you're talking about the potential of human life. If a woman has been killed 23 weeks in the car, T-boned, and both die, then yes, there's 2 lives here. So that person is charged with 2 murders, like 2 deaths by driving.
Double homicide, yeah.
But that's a potential from that. And so I would see the point, because the potential for life, this could have been a 90-year-old grandmother, if she'd been allowed to live. That's a potential. And that has been cut short. And the same for this infant as well. So I would see the point of that. But at the same time, if you then took that that embryo or that fetus out of the womb right now, it would not survive because it's not designed for the world at this stage.
Well, there's no question that that's medically correct. Whether that immediately automatically translates to that being ethically correct is where I think we disagree. And I'm terribly sorry to say that we still haven't had a proper ding-dong argument. I think because we're just both adults and we can actually discuss weighty issues of life and death and not hate each other. It's a problem.
Or could be the gin.
You've not had enough of it. That's the problem. You needed to have more.
I'll have some more.
Yeah. So look, we're going to reschedule another time. I'll drink an entire bottle of whiskey. You'll drink an entire bottle of gin. And by the end, we will be properly going for it.
But did you know, as I took 3 talks of this, did I turn out to be inebriated?
No, you've been tremendously lucid, frustratingly lucid all the way through.
I know.
Look, Dr. Brian Walker, MLC, thank you so much for giving us nearly 2.5 hours of your time tonight. This chat has been a pleasure. We agree on many things. We fundamentally disagree on many others, and I suspect that those differences are probably intractable. We will probably never find agreement on those, but I hope that tonight we've demonstrated that we can still actually have good conversation, work together where it makes sense for us to do so, oppose each other where we believe we must do so, but continue to be decent human beings all the way through. Thank you so much for your company tonight. Thank you, everyone that's watched. I apologize. I got so caught up in the conversation and enjoyed it so much that I don't think I've done a single comment in the last hour and a half up on screen. So I do apologize to my viewers. I will try and do better for the next slow chat, but I hope you've enjoyed tonight and tune in next month. There'll be another slow chat. Dr. Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you indeed.
Alrighty, everyone.